Before we begin, if you have video ideas you'd like to see brought to life, drop them in the comments below. And if you enjoy these deep dives into the shadows of history, please like and subscribe to Sleep Theories. It helps us continue uncovering stories that deserve to be told. Some disappearances aren't mysteries, they're procedures. In 1979, a junior congressional aide named Daniel Cross discovered that the United States government had perfected the art of making people vanish, not through violence, but through something far more insidious: the systematic erasure of their existence from every official record, every database, every trace of bureaucratic proof that they had ever lived at all. This is his story, and perhaps it's still happening today. Act 1. The Discovery. The Senate Hart building smelled like old paper and broken promises. Daniel Cross had been working there for 8 months, and in that time he'd learned that most of government ran on two things: coffee and forgotten filing cabinets. At 27, Daniel was young enough to still believe in accountability, and old enough to know it was rare. Fresh out of Georgetown with a degree in political science, he'd landed a position as a legislative aide to Senator Margaret Harlow, chair of the Subcommittee on Defense Appropriations Oversight. It sounded impressive. In reality, it meant Daniel spent his days drowning in paperwork that nobody else wanted to read. Today was no different. The senator had tasked him with organising the historical archives, which was government speak for shove 70 years of documents into some semblance of order before the next audit. Daniel sat in a windowless basement room, surrounded by boxes that predated his birth, methodically working through Defense Department appropriations records from the 1960s and 70s. Most of it was numbingly routine: budget allocations for aircraft carriers, contractor payments for missile systems, endless columns of numbers that represented billions in taxpayer money, all neatly justified and documented. But then Daniel found the anomaly. It was buried in a 1972 Defense Appropriations Subcommittee report, printed on yellowing paper that crackled when he turned the pages. Lay in Item 847B. Administrative Elimination Protocol, Directive HLT 72, approved allocation $14.7 million annually. Daniel frowned. Administrative elimination? That was odd phrasing. He'd seen plenty of bureaucratic euphemisms: strategic disengagement for retreat, negative patient outcome for death. But this one was new. He flipped through the rest of the document looking for context. Nothing. The line item appeared with no explanation, no justification memo, no supporting documentation. Just a budget allocation that had apparently been approved without question, year after year. Daniel pulled out his legal pad and jotted down the reference number. Then he kept digging. Over the next 3 hours, he found 6 more references to Directive HLT 72, scattered across different fiscal years between 1955 and 1978. The allocations varied. Some years it was 20 million, others just 8. But it always appeared in the same cryptic fashion. No details, no accountability. What made it even stranger was the contractor list. Most Defense Department programs had a paper trail a mile long, with every bolt and rivet accounted for and attributed to specific companies. But the contractors associated with Directive HLT 72 were different. Daniel found 17 company names across the various appropriations reports. He wrote them all down. Meridian Systems Incorporated, Blackwell Data Solutions, Continental Archives LLC, others with generic names that sounded official but revealed nothing. Then he did something that would change his life forever. He cross-referenced them. Using the Senate's access to government databases, Daniel searched for any other mention of these companies: tax records, incorporation documents, other government contracts, anything. The results chilled him. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Meridian Systems Incorporated appeared in the 1961 Appropriations Report as receiving $3.2 million for administrative elimination services. But according to every other database Daniel could access, Meridian Systems Incorporated had never existed. No incorporation papers, no tax filings, no business licenses, no addresses. It was as if someone had written them a check for $3 million and then erased every proof that they'd ever been real. Daniel leaned back in his creaking chair, staring at his notes. 17 companies, hundreds of millions of dollars over 2 decades, and not one trace of their existence outside these dusty appropriation reports. Either this was the most massive clerical error in government history, or something else was going on. Something deliberate. He thought about the phrase again: administrative elimination. Not termination, not liquidation. Elimination. Daniel glanced at his watch. It was past 7 in the evening. The building was mostly empty, just the occasional footsteps of security guards making their rounds. He should go home, get some sleep, forget about this rabbit hole. Instead, he pulled another box toward him and kept reading. By midnight, he'd found something else. A personnel roster from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, dated 1958. It listed 47 scientists and engineers working on classified projects. Standard stuff. But when Daniel cross-referenced those names with other government records, Social Security Administration, Census Bureau, Veterans Affairs, 8 of them didn't exist anywhere else. 8 people who'd supposedly worked on classified defense projects, who'd presumably been paid, who'd lived and worked and breathed, had somehow left no trace in any other government system. Daniel's hands were shaking as he wrote down the names. This wasn't just about money disappearing into shell companies, this was about people. He gathered his notes, stuffed them into his briefcase, and took the metro home to his tiny apartment in Arlington. He didn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about those 8 names, wondering what had happened to them, wondering if anyone else even remembered they'd existed. Act 2. Whispers of the Past. Daniel spent the next week being very careful. He didn't tell Senator Harlow what he'd found. Not yet. He needed more evidence before bringing something this strange to her attention. Instead, he used his lunch breaks and evenings to follow the trail wherever it led. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, the Office of Personnel Management's retirement records. Daniel had been searching for any connection to the 8 missing DARPA scientists when he found a notation in a 1972 memo about pension disbursements. It referenced administrative cleanup of records from the Eisenhower era, supervised by someone named Arthur Kellerman, who'd worked in Defense Department payroll for 30 years. Arthur Kellerman was still alive. Daniel found him in a retirement community in Bethesda, Maryland. The old man agreed to meet on a Thursday afternoon. Daniel told the senator's office he had a dentist appointment, and drove out to a place called Sunset Gardens, where the residents played bridge and complained about the quality of the meatloaf. Arthur Kellerman was 83, thin as paper, with liver-spotted hands that trembled slightly as he poured tea in the community centre's lounge. But his eyes were sharp, and when Daniel mentioned Directive HLT 72, something flickered across his face. "You found it," Kellerman said quietly. "I wondered if anyone ever would." Daniel leaned forward. "You know about it?" "Know about it?" The old man laughed, a dry sound like rustling leaves. "Son, I processed the paychecks. From 1954 to 1976, I was one of 3 people in payroll who handled the directive accounts. We called them ghost payments." "Ghost payments?" Kellerman nodded. "Every month we get a list. 20, sometimes 30 names. We generate paychecks, process direct deposits, the whole 9 yards. But here's the thing. These weren't real employees, at least not anymore." "What do you mean?" The old man was quiet for a moment, staring into his tea. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. The program started in the early 50s, right at the height of the Red Scare. The idea was simple, in a twisted sort of way. When someone became a security risk, a scientist who talked too much, an activist who knew too much, even a few soldiers who'd seen things they shouldn't have, the program would make them disappear, not killed. That was too messy, too much potential for exposure. Instead, they'd be eliminated administratively. Daniel felt his chest tighten. How? "Records," Kellerman said. "Birth certificates altered. Social security numbers reassigned. Employment histories rewritten. Education transcripts vanished. medical records destroyed. Within 6 months, it was as if they'd never existed. And without proof of identity, without any paper trail, they couldn't work, couldn't travel, couldn't access banking. They became ghosts, homeless, invisible, helpless. "That's not possible," Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. He'd seen the evidence himself. The bureaucracy isn't that coordinated. "It is when there's enough money and motivation," Kellerman replied. The program had access to every major federal database. They had people in Social Security, in the Census Bureau, in the IRS. They could make changes that rippled through every system, and because it was classified at the highest level, there was no oversight, no accountability. But the paychecks were part of the cover, Kellerman finished. We kept processing payments for these eliminated people for years afterward. Made it look like they were still on the payroll, still working. But the money never went to them. It went into special accounts which then funded the program itself. Self-financing, self-perpetuating. Brilliant, in a horrifying way. Daniel pulled out his legal pad. "Do you remember any specific cases?" Kellerman was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. There was one. Thomas Brennan, physicist, worked at Los Alamos in the early 50s, started asking questions about weapons testing near civilian populations, wrote some letters to congressmen. In 1957, he disappeared. His wife filed a missing persons report, but here's the thing. When police investigated, they couldn't find any proof he'd ever existed. No birth certificate, no education records, no employment history at Los Alamos. The laboratory claimed they'd never heard of him. His wife was labelled delusional. She died in a psychiatric facility 3 years later. "Jesus," Daniel breathed. "There were others," Kellerman continued. "An activist named Patricia Morse who'd infiltrated a defence contractor to expose fraud. A Navy officer named James Wu who'd witnessed something in the Pacific he wasn't supposed to see. A journalist, though I don't remember her name, who was writing an expose on classified biological research. All of them eliminated, not with bullets, but with paperwork." "And nobody ever exposed this?" Kellerman gave him a sad smile. "How do you expose people who officially never existed?" "Their families were dismissed as crazy. Any records that could prove the program existed were buried in classified archives or destroyed. And anyone who worked on the program like me was bound by security oaths that could land us in prison for life if we talked." "Then why are you telling me now?" "Because I'm 83 years old and dying of cancer," Kellerman said bluntly. "They can't touch me anymore. And because somebody needs to know the truth. That program, Directive HLT 72, it was supposed to end in the 70s after Watergate and the Church Committee investigations. But I don't think it did. I think it just changed names, moved to different agencies, got contracted out to private companies." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "What makes you think that?" "Because bureaucracies don't just shut down profitable programs," Kellerman said. "They rebrand them, and the infrastructure that made HLT 72 possible, the ability to access and alter federal databases, the network of cooperating agencies, the private contractors with security clearances, all of that still exists. It's probably more sophisticated now, with computers and digital records." The old man leaned forward, his trembling hand gripping Daniel's wrist with surprising strength. "If you're going to pursue this, be careful. The program had custodians, people whose job was to protect the secret, to intercept anyone getting too close. They're still out there. And if they think you're a threat..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Daniel left the retirement home with a tape recording of their conversation and a growing sense of dread. He'd thought he was investigating a Cold War-era fraud scheme. Now he realised he might be looking at something that was still operational, still eliminating inconvenient people by erasing them from existence. He drove back to his apartment, checking his rearview mirror more often than usual, wondering if he was being paranoid or not paranoid enough. Act 3. The Pattern. Over the next month, Daniel became obsessed. He filed Freedom of Information Act requests with every agency he could think of. Defense, State, Justice, Homeland Security, even the CIA. He cross-referenced missing persons reports from the 1950s through 1970s with government employment records, looking for people who'd vanished and left no trace. The pattern was undeniable once you knew what to look for. He found 83 cases where individuals had disappeared under circumstances that matched what Kellerman had described. Activists, journalists, scientists, military personnel, people who'd apparently angered or frightened someone powerful enough to erase them. In each case, the sequence was the same. First came the disappearance, reported by frantic family members. Then came the investigation, which inevitably found no proof the person had ever existed. Birth certificates filed incorrectly, social security numbers invalidated due to clerical errors, employment records lost in fires or floods, education transcripts destroyed during routine archive purging. Always plausible, always deniable, always devastating. Daniel created a massive wall chart in his apartment, connecting names and dates and agencies with different coloured strings. It looked like something from a conspiracy theorist fever dream. But every connection was documented, backed by official records he'd painstakingly retrieved. He'd also found something else, the program's modern incarnation. Working with a friend named Marcus Chen, who did data analysis for a think tank, Daniel had started looking at current federal databases. Marcus was a genius with systems architecture, and he'd helped Daniel understand how modern government records worked. What they found was unsettling. "Look at this," Marcus said one evening in Daniel's apartment, pointing at his laptop screen. "These are placeholder entries in the Social Security Administration database. See these alphanumeric strings? They're not real social security numbers, but they're formatted to look real. They exist in the system, but don't connect to any actual person." "How many?" Daniel asked. "I've found about 400 so far, created over the past 10 years. They're sophisticated. Whoever made them understood the system well enough to make them nearly invisible. You'd only spot them if you were specifically looking for anomalies." "What are they for?" Marcus shrugged. "Could be test entries, could be system artifacts, or ... quote. He hesitated. "Or they could be placeholders for people who are about to be eliminated," Daniel finished. Marcus nodded reluctantly. "The infrastructure is still there, man. Social Security, IRS, FBI databases. They all talk to each other now through integrated systems. If someone had high-level access, they could alter records across multiple agencies simultaneously. It would be even easier now than it was in the 70s. Daniel felt sick. Who would have that kind of access? Officially? Senior officials at major agencies, probably some White House staff, maybe directors at the intelligence community. Unofficially? Private contractors who maintain the systems. And guess what I found when I started looking at who has contracts to maintain federal identity databases? He pulled up another screen. It showed a corporate website for a company called Sentinel Dynamics Corporation. They're a security contractor, started in 1992. They provide biometric systems for airports, maintain databases for DHS and the FBI, and they have a division called Legacy Systems Integration that handles old government records digitization. "Let me guess," Daniel said. "No transparent ownership structure?" "Bingo! It's owned through a shell company in Delaware, which is owned by another shell company in the Caymans. I tried to trace it back, but I hit a wall. Whoever runs Sentinel doesn't want to be found." Daniel stared at the screen. The company's tagline was displayed beneath their logo, "Making the invisible visible. Securing America's future." "Making the invisible visible," he muttered. "Or making the visible invisible?" Marcus closed his laptop. "Daniel, I have to ask, what are you going to do with all this? You've got circumstantial evidence of a Cold War program and some weird database anomalies. You don't have proof of anything current." "Then I need to get proof," Daniel said. "That sounds dangerous." Kellerman said the program had custodians, people protecting the secret. If this is still running, those custodians are still out there. Daniel looked at his friend. "I need to find them, or let them find me." Marcus stood up, gathering his things. "Just promise me you'll be careful. Whatever this is, it's been operating for decades without being exposed. That means they're good at keeping secrets, and good at dealing with people who threaten those secrets." After Marcus left, Daniel sat alone in his apartment, staring at his wall of evidence. He documented everything, backed it up on magnetic tapes that he kept in a safe deposit box at 3 different banks. If something happened to him, at least the information would survive. He pulled out his phone and called a journalist he'd met at a Georgetown networking event. Rebecca Torres worked for the Washington Post's investigative unit. She specialised in government accountability stories. "Rebecca, it's Daniel Cross." "Yeah, it's been a while. Listen, I've got something I need to show you. It's about a Cold War program that I think is still running. Can we meet?" They arranged to meet the following Tuesday at a coffee shop in Georgetown. Daniel hung up feeling both relieved and terrified. This was the point of no return. Once he showed a journalist his evidence, there was no taking it back. He tried to sleep that night, but couldn't. He kept thinking about Thomas Brennan, Patricia Morse, James Wu, and all the others who had been erased. People with families, with lives, with futures, all deleted with paperwork and bureaucratic efficiency. If he was right, if the program was still running, how many people had been eliminated in the past 40 years? How many ghosts were walking around right now, unable to prove they existed, unable to work or access help, invisible to a society that ran on digital identity? The thought was staggering and terrifying. Act 4. The pushback. The pushback started subtly. On Monday morning, Daniel received emails from 3 different agencies responding to his FOIA requests. All 3 said the same thing. "No records found matching your request." That was odd. 2 of those requests had received preliminary confirmations weeks earlier, stating that responsive records had been located and were being prepared for release. Now those same agencies claimed no records existed. Daniel called the FOIA officers. The clerks were polite but firm. No records. No previous confirmations. Must have been a mistake. He checked his files. He'd saved the confirmation emails. They were gone. Not in his inbox, not in his sent folder, not in his deleted items. Just gone. Daniel sat at his desk in the Senate office, the cold feeling spreading through his chest. Digital records could be altered. Emails could be deleted remotely if someone had access to the server. He'd always known this intellectually, but experiencing it was different. Someone was watching. Someone knew what he was investigating. He left the office early claiming he felt sick. It wasn't a lie. He felt nauseous with anxiety. On the metro ride home, he kept checking to see if anyone was following him. He couldn't tell. In a city of 600,000 people, everyone looks suspicious if you were paranoid enough. When he got home, he knew immediately that something was wrong. The apartment door was locked, but there were scratches around the deadbolt that hadn't been there that morning. Inside, everything looked normal at first glance. His furniture was untouched, his dishes were still in the sink, his TV was still on the stand. But his work was different. Daniel kept his research materials in a filing cabinet in his bedroom. The papers were still there, seemingly undisturbed, but they were in slightly the wrong order. He'd had them alphabetized by subject, and now they were alphabetized by date. Someone had gone through them, photographed them probably, and then tried to put them back the way they'd found them. They'd done a good job. Daniel only noticed because he'd been paranoid enough to create a specific filing system, with papers in an order that would seem random to anyone else. His magnetic backup tapes were gone. He'd kept them in a shoebox in his closet, hidden under old clothes. The shoebox was still there, the clothes were still there, the tapes were not. Daniel's hands shook as he checked the rest of the apartment. His computer was still there. They hadn't taken it, which meant they'd probably already copied the hard drive remotely, or they didn't think it contained anything useful. His phone seemed fine. He packed a bag with clothes and toiletries, grabbed his remaining documents, and left. He didn't know where he was going yet, but staying in the apartment felt dangerous. He checked into a motel in Silver Spring, Maryland, paying cash and using a fake name. Then he called Marcus from a payphone. "They broke into my place," Daniel said without preamble. "Didn't take anything visible, but they went through my research and stole my backup tapes." "Shit." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Daniel, maybe you should drop this. If they're willing to break into your home." "I can't drop it. I'm meeting with Rebecca Torres tomorrow. Once the Post publishes, I'll have some protection. They can't make me disappear if a major newspaper knows what I'm investigating." "You hope," Marcus said grimly. "Look, I'm going to send you something. Check your email in an hour. It's a file I've been sitting on. Wasn't sure if it was relevant. But if they're coming after you, you should have everything. What kind of file? Financial records. I did some more digging into Sentinel Dynamics, found some interesting connections between them and a law firm in Virginia that specialises in government contracts. That law firm has some very interesting clients, including several people who used to work in the intelligence community. I'll send you the details. Daniel hung up and checked into the motel. It was a depressing place, the kind where hourly rates were available, and the bedspread had mysterious stains. But it was anonymous, and right now, that was what mattered. He bought a cheap laptop from a nearby electronics store using cash and set up a new email account. An hour later, Marcus's file arrived. What Daniel read made his blood pressure spike. Marcus had traced Sentinel Dynamics through its shell company maze and found the real owners. 3 former CIA officers and a retired army general. All of them had worked in classified programs during the Cold War. All of them had security clearances that gave them access to the highest levels of government information. And all of them had connections to something called the Clearwater Foundation, a think tank that advised the government on national security policy. Daniel clicked through the linked documents. The Clearwater Foundation had been founded in 1983, right around the time Directive HLT 72 would have been winding down. It advocated for strong surveillance powers, minimal oversight of intelligence operations, and expansive definitions of national security threats. Reading between the lines, Daniel saw exactly what it was, a legitimate-looking organisation that existed to protect and perpetuate the kind of programs that should have been shut down decades ago. His phone rang. It was a blocked number. Daniel hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Cross." The voice was male, middle-aged, calm. "My name isn't important. What is important is that you stop what you're doing." Daniel's heart hammered. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows what you've been investigating. Directive HLT 72. The appropriations records, the missing scientists. You're asking dangerous questions. Questions that deserve answers. Perhaps. But pursuing those answers will ruin your life." The voice remained pleasant, almost friendly. "You have a promising career ahead of you. Senator Harlow thinks highly of you. You could go far in this town, don't throw that away chasing ghosts. They're not ghosts. They're people. People who were erased. People who were security threats, in a time when one careless word could trigger nuclear war. The program saved lives, Mr. Cross. It prevented catastrophic intelligence breaches. Yes, some individuals suffered. That's unfortunate, but it was necessary." "And is it still necessary?" Daniel asked. "Is it still happening?" The line was silent for a moment. "You should go home, Mr. Cross. Back to your apartment. You'll find that certain inconveniences have been resolved. Your FOIA request will be processed normally. Your backup tapes will be returned. All we ask is that you close this investigation and move on with your life. And if I don't, then you'll discover that being erased doesn't require Cold War paranoia. It just requires a few keystrokes in the right databases." The voice paused. "Go home, Mr. Cross. Forget what you've learned. Be smart." The line went dead. Daniel sat on the motel bed, shaking. That had been a threat. A clear, unambiguous threat. They could erase him, just like they'd erased Thomas Brennan and all the others. But they hadn't done it yet. Which meant they were hoping he'd back down voluntarily. Which meant they were worried about what would happen if they eliminated a congressional aide who'd been asking questions. It would raise red flags, trigger investigations, unless they were very careful about how they did it. Daniel didn't sleep that night. Instead, he wrote down everything he knew, everything he'd discovered, everything he suspected. He wrote it by hand in a cheap notebook, because handwritten documents couldn't be remotely deleted. Tomorrow he'd meet with Rebecca Torres. He'd give her everything, and maybe, just maybe, the truth would finally come out. Act 5. The Confrontation. Daniel didn't go home. He stayed in the motel, kept the laptop, and used a different route to Georgetown the next morning for his meeting with Rebecca. The coffee shop was crowded with students and professionals, everyone absorbed in their laptops and conversations. Rebecca was already there, sitting in a corner booth, her notepad ready. She was in her 40s, with sharp eyes and the weary look of someone who'd seen too many cover-ups. She'd broken stories about Pentagon fraud and congressional corruption. If anyone would take his evidence seriously, it was her. "You look terrible," she said as Daniel sat down. "I feel terrible." He pulled out his folder of documents and his handwritten notebook. "Rebecca, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, but I need you to hear me out." For the next hour, he laid it all out. The appropriations records, the ghost companies, the missing scientists, Arthur Kellerman's testimony, the modern database anomalies, Sentinel Dynamics and the Clearwater Foundation, the break-in, the threatening phone call. Rebecca took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, her expression growing more serious as the story progressed. When he finished, she sat back and studied him. "This is big. If it's real, it's real. The problem is proof. You've got a lot of circumstantial evidence and the testimony of one dying man. The appropriations records are suggestive but not conclusive. The database anomalies could be explained as clerical errors. And you can't prove the phone call you received was connected to any government program. What about Sentinel Dynamics? The connection to former intelligence officers? Interesting, but not illegal. Lots of ex-CIA guys go into private security. That's the revolving door. It's sleazy, but it's not criminal." Rebecca tapped her pen on her notepad. "To run this story, I need either documentary proof or multiple sources confirming the program's existence. Right now, you're my only source, and you're not even a direct witness. You're interpreting historical documents." Daniel felt his hope deflating. "So you won't publish?" "I didn't say that. I said I need more. If you can get me internal documents from Sentinel Dynamics or the Clearwater Foundation, something that explicitly connects them to an active elimination program, then we have a story. Without that, my editors will kill it." "How am I supposed to get internal documents from a private security contractor?" Rebecca gave him a sympathetic look. "That's the job, Daniel. Investigative journalism is about getting the proof, not just raising questions. If this program is real, there's documentation somewhere. Find it, and I'll run the story. Hell, I'll make it front page." They talked for another 20 minutes, with Rebecca giving him advice on how to approach potential sources and where to look for paper trails. But Daniel could see the skepticism in her eyes. She wanted to believe him, but she was a professional. She needed evidence that could withstand legal scrutiny. After they parted ways, Daniel walked through Georgetown's streets thinking. He'd been naive to think that just presenting his research would be enough. Newspapers didn't expose government programs based on speculation and pattern matching. They needed proof, which meant he needed to get that proof. Sentinel Dynamics had an office in McLean, Virginia. According to their website, they employed over 300 people and occupied a modern office building near the CIA headquarters. Daniel had driven past it during his research, a sleek glass structure with impressive security. Breaking in would be insane. He wasn't a spy or a burglar. He was a congressional aide with no training in covert operations. But he also kept thinking about that phone call, the calm voice telling him to go home and forget, the implicit threat that he could be erased. If he backed down now, nothing would change. The program would continue. More people would be eliminated, turned into ghosts, erased from existence by bureaucratic efficiency. Daniel made his decision. Over the next week he planned meticulously. He studied Sentinel Dynamics office building, noting security patterns and employee schedules. He created a fake identity, complete with a counterfeit contractor badge that he made using materials from an office supply store and some careful Photoshop work. It wouldn't stand up to serious scrutiny, but it might get him through the door. He also wrote out a detailed summary of everything he knew and left it with Marcus, along with instructions to release it to multiple media outlets if Daniel disappeared or died. On a Wednesday evening, when the office would be mostly empty but not entirely deserted, raising fewer suspicions than a midnight break-in, Daniel drove to McLean. His hands were slick with sweat as he approached the building. The security guard barely glanced at his fake badge, waving him through to the elevator. Daniel took it to the third floor where, according to the building directory, the Legacy Systems Integration Division was located. The office was quiet, A few people were still working in cubicles, but they ignored him. Daniel walked purposefully, as if he belonged there, heading toward what the building plans had indicated was a server room. The door was locked, but the keypad security was old. Daniel had watched enough YouTube videos to know that older models could be bypassed by entering a default admin code. He tried it. The door clicked open. Inside was exactly what he'd expected. Rows of server racks, blinking lights, the hum of cooling fans, and in the back corner something unexpected, a steel door marked archive storage. Daniel tried the handle, locked of course, but this one had a physical key lock and there was a key card reader next to it. He pulled out a universal keycard programmer that Marcus had reluctantly lent him, a device that was technically illegal to own, and tried to clone access. It took 5 attempts, but finally the lock clicked open. Beyond the door was a staircase leading down. Daniel descended into what appeared to be a basement level that wasn't on the building's official floor plan. The room below was temperature controlled and dimly lit. It was filled with old equipment, punch card readers, tape drives, terminals from the 70s and 80s. But some of the equipment was newer, connected to modern computers, and on those computers currently running were programs with names like Identity Reconciliation System and Record Harmonization Protocol. Daniel approached the nearest terminal. The screen showed a database interface, currently displaying a list of names with associated social security numbers. Next to each name was a status: active, pending, or eliminated. His stomach turned. This was it. This was the modern version of Directive H LT72. He pulled out a thumb drive and began copying files. The system didn't require a password. Why would it? This was a secure facility, supposedly. Nobody should be down here who wasn't authorized. The files downloaded slowly. While he waited, Daniel explored the rest of the room. He found filing cabinets filled with physical records, printouts of elimination orders dating back to the 90s, names, dates, justifications. Each one represented a person who'd been erased. He photographed as many as he could with his camera, working quickly, knowing that every second increased the risk of discovery. The thumb drive finished. Daniel pocketed it and turned to leave. That's when the lights came on, bright and fluorescent, and he found himself face to face with 2 security guards and a man in an expensive suit. "Mr. Cross," the suited man said. He was in his 60s with grey hair and the confident bearing of someone used to authority. "You're a very persistent young man. Stupid, but persistent. Who are you?" "My name is Richard Carlyle. I'm the Director of Operations for Sentinel Dynamics Government Services Division. And you've just committed multiple felonies: trespassing, theft of classified information, espionage." "It's not espionage to expose a criminal conspiracy." Carlyle smiled. "Criminal?" Directive HLT-72 was authorized at the highest levels of government. Every elimination was reviewed and approved. "What we do here is legal, Mr. Cross. Distasteful, perhaps. Necessary, absolutely, but legal. You're erasing people's identities, making them disappear. We're protecting national security. The people on that list are threats, spies, traitors, individuals who possess information that could harm this country. We don't kill them. We simply make it impossible for them to cause damage. It's humane, really." "Humane? You destroy their lives." "We save thousands of lives." Carlyle gestured to the guards. "Now you have a choice. We can prosecute you for the crimes you've just committed. You'll spend 20 years in federal prison. Or you can accept our offer." "What offer?" $2 million, deposited in an offshore account, a new identity if you want it, or your old one intact if you prefer. All we ask is that you sign a non-disclosure agreement and never speak of this again. You walk away, live your life, and everyone's happy." Daniel looked at the thumb drive in his pocket. He'd gotten what he came for: proof, evidence that could bring down the entire operation. But he had also just been caught red-handed in a secure facility, having stolen classified information. Carlyle was right. They could prosecute him. And who would believe his story then? A convicted felon claiming the government erased people? And if I say no? Carlyle's smile faded. Then you become our next case study in administrative elimination. By tomorrow morning, Daniel Cross will have never existed. Your birth certificate will show errors. Your social security number will be invalid. Your bank accounts will be frozen. Your apartment lease will show a different tenant. And within a week, you'll be a homeless man with no identity, no money, no future. Is that really what you want? Daniel thought about Thomas Brennan, Patricia Morse, James Wu, all the others who'd been erased, who'd died as ghosts. He thought about Rebecca Torres, waiting for proof. He thought about the thumb drive in his pocket. I need to think about it, Daniel said. You have 60 seconds. Daniel nodded slowly, then suddenly bolted toward the stairs. The guards moved to intercept him, but he was younger and faster. He made it to the stairwell and ran, taking the steps 3 at a time. Behind him, he heard shouting, footsteps pounding. He burst through the door at the top, sprinted through the office past shocked employees, and hit the elevator button frantically. It was too slow. He ran for the stairs, the emergency exit. He crashed through the door and started descending, flight after flight, his lungs burning. He made it to the ground floor, burst out into the parking lot and ran for his car. The security guard was shouting at him, but Daniel was already in the driver's seat, key in the ignition. He peeled out of the parking lot and drove. He didn't know where he was going, just away. Away from Sentinel Dynamics, away from the threat of erasure. He drove for 2 hours, finally stopping at a rest area on Highway 95. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone. He called Rebecca Torres. I got it, he said when she answered. I got the proof. Database records, elimination orders, everything. But they know I have it. They're coming after me. Where are you? Heading south. I can't tell you exactly. Rebecca, I need you to run this story now. Tonight. Before they can stop it. Daniel, I can't publish without vetting the documents. There's no time. They're going to erase me. Please, Rebecca, this is the story. This is what you've been waiting for. There was a long pause, then Rebecca said quietly, Send me everything you have. I'll see what I can do. Act 6. The Aftermath. The Washington Post ran the story 3 days later. It was front page, above the fold. Secret program erased citizens' identities for decades. Congressional aid claims. Rebecca had done her job well. She'd verified what she could, contextualized what she couldn't, and presented Daniel's evidence alongside official denials from Sentinel Dynamics and multiple government agencies. The story raised questions rather than providing definitive answers, but it was enough. The reaction was swift. Congressional hearings were announced. The Justice Department opened an investigation. Sentinel Dynamics' stock price collapsed. Richard Carlisle resigned. But Daniel never saw any of it. 2 weeks after the story ran, his Social Security number came back invalid. The Social Security Administration claimed it was a clerical error, that his number had been incorrectly issued decades ago, and they were just now correcting their records. His bank account was frozen due to identity verification issues. The bank couldn't explain why his identification documents suddenly didn't match their records. His apartment lease was terminated. The landlord showed him paperwork indicating the apartment had been rented to someone else 6 months ago. Daniel's signature on his own lease looked forged. His employment records at the Senate showed gaps and inconsistencies. Senator Harlow's office claimed they had no record of hiring anyone named Daniel Cross. He tried to fight it. He showed people his driver's license, his birth certificate, his college diploma. But every document was questioned, flagged as potentially fraudulent. The bureaucracy had turned against him, and there was no way to prove his own existence when the systems designed to verify identity said he didn't exist. Within a month, Daniel was homeless. He carried his few possessions in a backpack and slept in shelters. Nobody would hire him without valid identification. He couldn't access his bank accounts, couldn't rent an apartment, couldn't even get a library card. He'd been erased, just like Thomas Brennan and all the others. The investigations into Sentinel Dynamics went nowhere. The company produced thousands of pages of innocuous documents. The mysterious basement archive at their McLean office was found to contain nothing but old equipment, unplugged and inactive. The files Daniel had copied were dismissed as elaborate forgeries. Without Daniel Cross to testify, and with his credibility destroyed by his inability to prove his own identity, the story faded from the headlines. The congressional hearings concluded with recommendations for better oversight. The Justice Department closed its investigation, citing lack of evidence. The program continued. On a cold November night, 6 months after the Post story ran, a homeless man made his way to a rundown motel in Baltimore. He paid cash for a room, using money he'd panhandled over several weeks. In that room, Daniel Cross, or the person who'd once been Daniel Cross, set up a small tape recorder. He'd bought it used from a pawn shop. It was old technology, but reliable. He pressed record. "My name is Daniel Cross. I was born on March 15th, 1952 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I graduated from Georgetown University in 1977. I worked as a congressional aide for Senator Margaret Harlow until this year. If you're listening to this, it means I'm already gone." There's a program. It started in the Cold War, designed to eliminate people without killing them. It erases their identities, destroys their records, makes them disappear into bureaucratic black holes. It's still running today, operated by private contractors with access to every government database. They came after me because I'd discovered the truth. They erased me, just like they erased hundreds of others over the past 70 years. And they'll keep doing it until someone stops them. I tried to expose them. I gave evidence to the Washington Post. But the program is too well protected, too deeply embedded in our government's infrastructure. They have custodians, people whose entire job is to protect the secret and eliminate threats. I'm recording this as proof that I existed, that Daniel Cross was real, that this program is real. I'm leaving this tape in a safety deposit box under a false name. Maybe someone will find it someday. Maybe they'll succeed where I failed. Remember, sometimes they don't need to kill you to erase you. They just need to make everyone believe you were never real in the first place. If you're hearing this, don't make the same mistakes I did. Be smarter, be more careful, but don't give up. The truth matters, even if I'm not here to see it revealed." Daniel stopped the recording. He looked at the tape for a long moment, this small plastic rectangle that contained the last proof of his existence. Tomorrow he'd take it to a bank and put it in a safety deposit box. He'd use another fake name, pay for 20 years in advance with the last of his money. And maybe, someday, someone would find it. He lay back on the motel bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. He thought about his life before, his apartment, his job, his future. All gone, erased as thoroughly as if he'd never existed. But he'd tried, he'd fought back, and maybe that was enough. Daniel Cross closed his eyes and drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of a world where people couldn't be unmade with paperwork and keystrokes, dreaming of a world where the truth was stronger than erasure. Epilogue. The program continues to this day. It has changed names a dozen times, moved between agencies and contractors, evolved with technology. But its purpose remains the same, to eliminate threats not through violence, but through bureaucratic precision. How many people have been erased since Directive HLT 72 began? The true number is unknown, buried in classified archives that may no longer exist. How many people walk among us right now, unable to prove who they are, invisible to a society that requires documentation for everything? More than you'd think. And the custodians still watch, still protect the secret, still intercept anyone who gets too close to the truth. The tape Daniel Cross recorded was found in 2003, during a bank's routine clearing of abandoned safety deposit boxes. It was turned over to authorities and promptly classified. You will never hear it. The government will never acknowledge it exists. But somewhere in a secure facility, in a basement archive much like the one Daniel discovered, that tape remains. Physical proof that Daniel Cross existed, that he discovered the truth, that he tried to expose it, and that he was erased for his trouble. Remember his name, remember his story, because forgetting is exactly what they want. Sometimes the most dangerous conspiracies are the ones that hide in plain sight, protected not by secrecy, but by the sheer audacity of their existence. Who would believe that a government could erase people with paperwork? Who would believe that American citizens could be administratively eliminated their lives destroyed without a single shot fired? The answer is almost no one, which is why the program works and why it continues. Welcome back to Sleep Theories, where we explore the mysteries that lurk in the shadows of our world. Tonight's tale comes from the depths of the Arctic, where billion-dollar inheritances and cutting-edge technology collide with secrets that powerful forces would kill to keep buried. But before we dive into this chilling account, remember to leave your own mysterious video ideas in the comments below. Your suggestions fuel these midnight journeys into the unknown. Special thanks to Metal Patel 9283 and Unanimous 369 for inspiring tonight's story. And if these tales send the right kind of shivers down your spine, hit that like button and subscribe to Sleep Theories for more stories that blur the line between fact and nightmare. The money hit my account on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 72 hours after they lowered my father into frozen Vermont soil. $240 million, liquid assets, plus controlling shares in Grant Capital family office. Most sons might have celebrated. I stared at the bank transfer notification and felt nothing but the familiar weight of unfinished business. The sealed envelope arrived with the estate papers, heavy stock paper, my father's careful handwriting. Fund something only you would. Inside, a second note. The anomalies were real, Evan. You know which ones. I did know. For 15 years, since I was 17 and still believed my MIT robotics PhD would change the world, Dad and I had tracked them together. Gravitational lows that shouldn't exist. Magnetic field excursions with no geological explanation. Infrasound microbarums detected by monitoring stations, their sources plotting along high-latitude crustal boundaries in patterns too regular for coincidence. We called it our weekend hobby. Dad would pull up classified geological surveys from his government contacts, and I'd run signal processing algorithms looking for correlations. Most of the data pointed to the same region. The Greenland-Gackel Ridge microseismic corridor where routine icequakes masked deeper signals. Signals that seemed almost intentional. The scientific community had explanations, of course. Mantle convection, post-glacial rebound, thermal expansion in deep ice. All perfectly reasonable theories that fell apart when you looked at the frequency signatures and phase relationships. Dad knew it. I knew it. But proving it would require the kind of expedition money that made most researchers laugh. Now I had that money. I spent the first week after the funeral in my workshop in Burlington, converting grief into engineering problems. The plan had been taking shape in my head for years, waiting for funding that would never come through traditional channels. Now, with Dad's inheritance, I could make it happen. The key was piggybacking on existing infrastructure. Arctic research required massive logistical support, but if you could tag along with established operations, costs dropped to manageable levels. A Norwegian telecommunications company was running fibre optic cable repairs along the Greenland Sea shipping routes. Perfect cover for dropping distributed acoustic sensing nodes in the target area. I incorporated a shell company, Polar Dynamics LLC, and put in a bid for a seafloor sensing contract. The Norwegians didn't ask too many questions as long as the check cleared. By April, I had a slot on their cable repair vessel and permission to deploy geological monitoring equipment along their route. Next came personnel. I needed people good enough to handle Arctic conditions, but desperate enough to take money from a PhD dropout with crazy theories. Rhea Patel answered my encrypted message within 6 hours. Former Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory geophysicist, blacklisted after publishing papers that questioned established models of polar volcanism. Her research had suggested large-scale thermal anomalies beneath Arctic ice sheets, anomalies that didn't match known geothermal sources. The academic community buried her work in bureaucratic reviews until she quit in frustration. "Your message mentioned gravitational lows," she said during our first video call. "Which specific coordinates?" I shared the data sets Dad and I had compiled. She was quiet for a long time, studying the displays. "These readings," she shook her head, They're not possible. The mass deficit implied here would require cavities thousands of meters across. That's what we think too. We? My father and I. He died last month. I'm sorry, she paused. What kind of equipment are you proposing? I outlined the sensor package. Military-grade distributed acoustic sensing, deep-sea magnetometers, thermal imaging arrays. Everything needed to map subsurface structures with unprecedented resolution. You're talking about technology worth millions of dollars. Money isn't an issue. It never is, until it is. But I could hear the interest in her voice. When do we deploy? For logistics, I tracked down Holt. No first name, just Holt. Through Navy veteran networks. Retired ice operations specialist. 30 years of Arctic experience, including classified submarine missions he wouldn't discuss. He agreed to handle expedition planning and icebreaker charter for a flat fee that would have bought a luxury car. Our first meeting was at a diner in Portsmouth. Holt looked exactly like Central Casting would order for a grizzled Navy veteran. Weathered face, grey beard, eyes that had seen too much. He listened to my pitch without expression, occasionally asking technical questions that proved he understood the equipment better than most researchers. You're hunting something specific, he said finally, not just mapping thermal anomalies. We think there might be large-scale cavities beneath the ice sheet, natural formations but much larger than current models predict. Cavities? He stirred his coffee thoughtfully. What kind of evidence? I showed him the acoustic data, the gravitational anomalies, the magnetic field disruptions. He studied each display with professional attention. Seen stranger things under the ice, he said. When do we ship out? The legal complications came from Mara Ling, the family office counsel Dad had trusted with everything. She reviewed the expedition contracts with the enthusiasm of someone defusing a bomb. Export controls will be an issue, she warned during our meeting in the Grant Capital offices overlooking Boston Harbour. Half this sensor equipment falls under international traffic in arms regulations. Getting export permits for Arctic deployment could take months. What if the equipment never technically leaves US territorial waters? Explain. The cable repair vessel operates under Norwegian flag, but it carries mixed international crew. If our sensors are operated by US personnel, they remain under US jurisdiction regardless of deployment location. Mara made notes. Complicated, but workable. What about the target coordinates? Any territorial water conflicts? I pulled up the charts showing our planned survey area. International waters, more than 200 miles from any national boundary. But, I hesitated. But what? The area falls under NOTAM and NOTMAR restrictions. Notice to airmen and maritime advisories. Military training exercises, mostly classified. How classified? Classified enough that asking questions gets you referred to other people who also can't answer questions. Mara leaned back in her chair. Evan, are you absolutely certain about this expedition? Because once we trigger export control reviews and international logistics contracts, there's no quietly backing out. I thought about Dad, about 15 years of weekend anomaly hunting, about the gravitational lows that violated everything we thought we knew about planetary geology. I'm certain. The equipment build took 2 months. Most components came from established scientific suppliers, but the centerpiece, my autonomous deep-sea submersible, required custom fabrication. I'd been designing Odin 3 in my head since graduate school. A neutrally buoyant micro-AUV rated to 6,000 meters depth, equipped with LiDAR mapping, thermal flux sensors, and enough onboard processing power to operate independently for weeks. The propulsion system used biomimetic undulation, artificial muscle fibers that moved like a sea snake rather than traditional propellers. Quieter, more efficient and less likely to trigger acoustic sensors that might be monitoring the deployment area. Battery technology was the limiting factor. Even with cutting-edge lithium-sulfur cells, Odin 3 could operate for maybe 72 hours before needing to surface for recharging. That meant every minute of dive time had to count. I tested the prototype in Lake Champlain during late spring ice-out. Odin 3 performed flawlessly, mapping the lake bottom with centimetre resolution while maintaining perfect depth control. The biomimetic propulsion drew curious lake trout that followed the submersible like a mechanical Pied Piper. "Beautiful work," Rhea said, reviewing the test footage. "When do we head north?" June 15th. The cable repair vessel reaches our coordinates on the 20th. Weather window? 4 days, maybe 5 if we're lucky. After that, storm systems move in, and we won't have another opportunity until August. Holt had chartered the Norwegian icebreaker Nordkapp through contacts in the commercial shipping industry. The vessel was overkill for summer Arctic operations, but its dynamic positioning system could hold station precisely over our target coordinates regardless of ice conditions. "Captain's reliable," Holt reported. 30 years ice experience doesn't ask questions about cargo as long as the charter fee's clear on time. What about support equipment? Portable diamond wire ice cutting rig for creating deployment holes. Thermal tent for equipment staging. Emergency shelter rated to -40. Medical kit for remote operations. He paused. And firearms. Firearms? Polar bears aren't the only thing that might want to discourage visitors in that part of the Arctic. I decided not to ask what he meant. The flight to Longyearbyen, Svalbard, took 18 hours with connections. Rhea met me at the tiny airport with news that our equipment shipment had cleared Norwegian customs without issues. "The distributed acoustic sensing nodes deployed perfectly," she reported. "Initial data streams are clean. No interference from the cable repair operations." "What about background acoustic conditions?" "Quiet. Almost too quiet. Normal Arctic regions show constant low-level seismic activity. Thermal expansion, ice settling, small crustal movements. This area is dormant." We spent 2 days in Longyearbyen finalising logistics and monitoring the DAS network. The acoustic data revealed exactly what Dad and I had hoped to find. A repeating 0.9 to 1.2 Hz tremor pattern with phase relationships that didn't match any known geological process. "It's not mantle convection," Rhea confirmed, studying the frequency analysis. "The phase lead is all wrong. This signal originates much closer to the surface." "How much closer, if I had to guess?" "Less than 2 kilometres depth. Maybe much less." The Nordkapp reached our coordinates on schedule, arriving at a polynya that shouldn't have existed given seasonal ice conditions. The open water area stretched nearly 3 kilometres across, with thermal imaging showing warm upwelling at the centre. "Water temperature is 4 degrees above ambient," reported Captain Eriksson. "There's a significant thermal source beneath this opening." Holt was already assembling the diamond wire cutting rig on deck. "We'll need a deployment hole at least 2 metres diameter for clean submersible operations. The ice here looks thin, maybe 8 metres. How thin should it be? This time of year? 20 metres minimum. Something's been keeping this area warm." I helped Rhea deploy additional magnetometer arrays while Holt's crew cut our access hole. The magnetic data was even more striking than the acoustic signatures. A sharp ring discontinuity approximately 600 metres in diameter, with field strength dropping by 30% inside the boundary. "It's like there's a massive void just below us," Rhea said, checking readings for the 3rd time. "A cavity large enough to significantly disrupt local magnetic fields." "Large enough for what?" "I don't know. I've never seen readings like this." The deployment hole was ready by evening, perfectly circular, with the diamond wire leaving glass-smooth ice walls that reflected our work lights in prismatic colours. At the bottom, black water disappeared into depths that seemed to swallow light itself. "Odin 3 is ready," I announced, running final system checks on the submersible. All sensors showed green, battery charge at 100%. The biomimetic propulsion system cycled smoothly through test sequences. "Deployment at first light," Holt decided. "Weather forecast shows possible storm activity moving in from the west. We'll have maybe 36 hours before conditions deteriorate." I spent the night monitoring background sensor readings and trying not to think about what we might find below. The DAS network continued detecting those regular 0.9 Hz pulses, now strong enough that I could feel them as subtle vibrations through the ship's hull. At 0600 hours, with Arctic sunrise painting the ice sheet in shades of gold and pink, we lowered Odin 3 into the deployment hole. "Depth 10 metres, I announced, monitoring telemetry from the control station. All systems nominal. The submersible descended through clear Arctic water. its cameras revealing ice walls that seemed to glow with internal light. At 50 meters depth, the water temperature began rising noticeably. Thermal gradient is increasing, Ria reported. We're definitely over a major heat source. At 100 meters, Odin 3 encountered the first surprise, a distinct thermocline boundary where Arctic surface water met much warmer deep currents. The temperature differential was so sharp that it created visible distortion on the camera feed. Water chemistry is changing too, I noted, watching sensor readouts. Salinity increasing, dissolved gas content showing methane and hydrogen signatures. At 400 meters depth, we hit the warm brine layer proper. Water temperature had climbed to nearly 4 degrees Celsius, tropical by Arctic standards. Odin 3's sonar began detecting large-scale structure ahead. Sonar contact, I announced. Large object bearing 030, range approximately 800 meters. Natural formation? Unknown. The return signature is unusual. At 600 meters depth, Odin 3's forward cameras finally illuminated our target. What we saw made no sense according to any geological model I knew. A curved wall of dark stone stretched beyond the camera's range, its surface polished smooth, as if carved by intelligent design. The wall followed a perfect arc, suggesting a circular or cylindrical structure of enormous proportions. "That's not natural," Ria whispered, staring at the video feed. "The surface is too regular, too smooth. It looks almost manufactured." At 800 meters, Odin 3 reached what appeared to be an opening in the structure. The submersible's sonar painted a three-dimensional map of empty space beyond. A vast cavity extending hundreds of meters in all directions. "I'm seeing void boundary returns," I reported, trying to keep excitement out of my voice. "The LiDAR is mapping a cavern system at least 600 meters wide." "How deep?" "Unknown. The laser rangefinder isn't hitting a bottom boundary." I guided Odin 3 through the opening into the cavity beyond. What we found there changed everything we thought we knew about Arctic geology. The cavern was enormous, a perfect hemisphere carved from living rock, its walls covered in mineral formations that created geometric patterns too regular for natural processes. Thermal imaging showed active water circulation throughout the space, creating currents and eddies like atmospheric weather systems. "The water is moving," Ria observed, watching thermal patterns shift across the cavity. "There's active circulation down there, powered by heat sources we can't see." "Look at the biological readings." Odin 3's sensors were detecting life signs throughout the cavern, not the sparse microorganism communities typical of deep Arctic environments, but complex biological structures that seemed to thrive in the warm, mineral-rich water. "Those are bacterial mats," Ria said, studying the imagery. "But the metabolic signatures are unlike anything in the literature. They're processing hydrogen and methane at rates that should be impossible." "Processing them into what?" "Unknown organic compounds. The spectral analysis suggests completely novel biochemistry." As Odin 3 descended deeper into the cavern, its cameras revealed increasingly strange formations. Hexagonal mineral growths clustered around thermal vents, crystalline structures that seemed to channel water flow in specific patterns, and everywhere those bacterial mats forming complex filamentary networks that pulsed with bioluminescent activity. "This isn't just a geological anomaly," I said, watching the alien landscape scroll past on our monitors. "This is an entire ecosystem that shouldn't exist." At 1100 meters depth, Odin 3's sonar detected something that stopped our conversation entirely. Deep in the cavern, moving objects were generating acoustic signatures that looked almost like sonar beacons. "Are you seeing this?" Ria asked, pointing at the display. The acoustic signatures were too regular for natural phenomena. Short pulses at precise intervals, frequency modulated in patterns that suggested artificial generation. Someone, or something, was actively using sonar down there. "Could be equipment from previous expeditions," Holt suggested, but his voice carried no conviction. "What previous expeditions?" I replied. "This location isn't on any charts. We're the first people to map this cavity." The sonar beacon signals were growing stronger as Odin 3 descended. At 1200 meters, The submersible's passive acoustic sensors began detecting other sounds, mechanical noises that might have been machinery, structural creaking that suggested large mobile objects. "There's something else down there," I said, making the decision that would change everything. Something active. I programmed Odin 3 to approach the strongest sonar source while maintaining maximum stealth profile. The submersible's biomimetic propulsion was nearly silent, and its dark hull should be invisible to most detection systems. At 1300 metres, Odin 3's cameras finally revealed the source of the sonar beacons. Mechanical devices, clearly artificial, clearly functional, were distributed throughout the deepest part of the cavern. They looked like nothing in any engineering textbook I'd studied, but their purpose was unmistakable. They were monitoring equipment, sophisticated sensors that had been operating in this hidden space for an unknown length of time. "Those aren't human-built," Rhea said quietly. I was about to agree when Odin 3's communication system erupted with alarms. High-frequency radio interference was jamming our telemetry link, while powerful sonar pulses began hammering the submersible from multiple directions. "We're being painted," Holt announced, recognizing military terminology. "Something's actively scanning us." On the surface, Captain Ericsson's voice came over the ship's intercom. "Unknown contacts approaching from the northwest. 2 vessels, high-speed intercept course." Through Odin 3's cameras, I watched the mysterious monitoring equipment come alive with activity. Lights began flashing in complex patterns, while mechanical arms extended from hidden recesses to point directly at our submersible. "Recall Odin 3, Holt ordered. "Now." But the telemetry link was completely jammed. Odin 3 was on its own, 1300 metres down in an impossible cavern, surrounded by technology that shouldn't exist. "Captain," Holt called to the bridge, "what's the status on those approaching vessels? Military configuration. They're transmitting on emergency frequencies, ordering us to cease operations and prepare for boarding." I stared at the video feed from Odin 3, watching alien machinery track our submersible with obvious intelligence. Whatever we'd found down there, someone, or something, had been expecting visitors. "How long until those ships reach us?" 20 minutes. 20 minutes to extract Odin 3 from the most important discovery in human history. 20 minutes before we lost everything. I activated the submersible's emergency ascent protocol, hoping the automated systems could navigate back to our deployment hole without remote guidance. On the monitors, Odin 3's cameras showed the mysterious monitoring equipment following its movement with mechanical precision. Then the feed went completely black. "Telemetry link is dead," I announced. "We've lost all contact with Odin 3. "Could be jamming," Rhea suggested. "If those devices are using electromagnetic interference." "Or it could be destroyed," Holt finished grimly. Captain Ericsson's voice crackled over the intercom again. "The approaching vessels are identifying themselves as Norwegian Coast Guard, but their radar signatures don't match any known vessel types. They're requesting immediate cessation of all underwater operations. Tell them we're conducting authorized scientific research in international waters." I tried. They're not interested in discussing authorization. I ran emergency calculations in my head. Odin 3's automated ascent would take approximately 40 minutes from 1300 metres depth, assuming the submersible was still functional and could navigate the complex cavern geometry without remote guidance. The approaching vessels would reach us in 15 minutes. We need to buy time, I decided. "Captain, can you move us away from the deployment hall while maintaining dynamic positioning?" "How far?" "Just enough to look like we're complying with their orders while keeping the hull within Odin 3's navigation range." The Nordkap began moving slowly away from our position, its powerful thrusters maintaining precise station keeping, despite increasing wind and wave activity. On sonar, I could see the 2 approaching vessels changing course to intercept. "Military hulls," Captain Ericsson reported. "Definitely not standard Coast Guard configuration. These ships are built for Arctic operations." At 12 minutes to intercept, something extraordinary happened. The deployment hull began glowing. "Thermal bloom," Rhea announced, watching her instruments spike. "Massive heat signature rising from depth." Through binoculars, I could see the water in our cutting hole beginning to bubble and steam. Whatever was happening in the cavern below, it was generating enormous amounts of thermal energy. Could be a volcanic event, Captain Erickson suggested. Or something else, I replied, thinking about those mysterious monitoring devices. At 8 minutes to intercept, Odin 3 broke the surface. The submersible emerged from the deployment hole like a breaching whale, its dark hull gleaming with condensation from the superheated water below. But something was wrong with its movement. Instead of the smooth, controlled ascent I'd programmed, Odin 3 was rising too fast, as if being pushed upward by some tremendous force. "Emergency recovery!" Holt shouted, activating the deck crane. "That thing's coming up whether we're ready or not." The crane's magnetic grappler locked onto Odin 3's recovery point just as the submersible cleared the water completely. What I saw then made me question everything I thought I understood about physics. Odin 3's hull was covered in a thin layer of mineral deposits that glowed with internal phosphorescence. The deposits formed geometric patterns across the submersible's surface, hexagonal crystals that pulsed with rhythmic light like a technological heartbeat. "Those formations weren't there during deployment," Rhea observed. "No, something down there changed Odin 3's hull chemistry." As the crane swung the submersible onto deck, I could see that its sensor array had been modified. Additional components had somehow been integrated into the original equipment, crystalline structures that seemed to grow from the electronic systems themselves. "Is the data core intact?" I asked, running to the submersible's access panels. "External storage shows full capacity," Holt reported, checking system readouts. "But there's something else. Odin 3's internal clock shows it was submerged for 6 hours. That's impossible. We deployed 2 hours ago. Check the timestamp yourself." The numbers were undeniable. According to Odin 3's internal systems, the submersible had spent 6 hours in the underwater cavern, despite our surface chronometers showing only 2 hours had elapsed since deployment. "Time differential," Rhea suggested. "Strong gravitational fields can create temporal distortion effects." "Or the systems were tampered with," Holt countered. At 3 minutes to intercept, I made the decision that would haunt me for years afterward. Instead of immediately downloading Odin 3's data storage, I activated the submersible's emergency beacon protocol, a hidden transmission system I'd built for exactly this situation. The beacon broadcast a compressed data burst on multiple frequencies simultaneously, uploading Odin 3's most important sensor readings to a network of internet-connected receivers around the Arctic. Whatever happened next, some record of our discovery would survive. The first military vessel reached us just as the data transmission completed. "Norwegian Coast Guard cutter Barentsburg requesting permission to board," came the radio call. But the ship approaching our starboard side looked nothing like any Coast Guard vessel I'd ever seen. Its hull was too angular, its superstructure too advanced, its sensor arrays too sophisticated for civilian maritime enforcement. "Permission denied," Captain Erickson replied. "We are conducting legal scientific research in international waters." "Mr. Grant," a new voice cut in on the radio, speaking directly to me. "This is Commander North, liaison from Northern Command. We need to discuss your research activities immediately." "I'm not required to discuss anything with you, Commander. Our expedition is fully authorized under international maritime law." "Your expedition is interfering with classified military operations in this area. For your own safety, I'm ordering immediate cessation of all underwater activities and escort to the nearest port facility." Through binoculars, I could see armed personnel on the deck of the approaching vessel. This wasn't a regulatory discussion, it was a seizure operation. "Captain," I said quietly, how fast can we move?" "In these conditions? Maybe 12 knots. They can do 30. Then we negotiate." Commander North's voice came over the radio again. "Mr. Grant, are you prepared to comply with our lawful orders?" "I'm prepared to discuss this situation like reasonable adults. What specific military operations are we allegedly interfering with?" "That information is classified. You'll be briefed during debriefing procedures at the appropriate facility." "What facility?" "That information is also classified." I looked at Holt, who was already making preparations for what he obviously expected to be a hostile boarding operation. Rhea was frantically copying data files from our expedition computers to encrypted portable drives. "Commander North," I said into the radio, "I'm a United States citizen conducting legal scientific research. Under what authority are you detaining us? Maritime security protocols implemented under NATO Article 5 emergency provisions. What emergency? The emergency you created by deploying unauthorized sensing equipment in restricted waters. These aren't restricted waters. I checked all maritime notices before planning this expedition. The restriction was classified until your activities triggered it. I began to understand. We hadn't stumbled into a restricted area. Our presence had caused the area to become restricted. Someone had been monitoring our expedition from the beginning, waiting to see what we would find. The question was, who had been watching, and what did they already know about the cavern below? Mr. Grant, Commander North continued, you have 2 minutes to prepare for boarding operations. Any resistance will be considered an act of maritime piracy. I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. Permission granted for boarding, Commander, but I want written documentation of the legal basis for this operation, and I want communication with the United States Embassy in Oslo. That can be arranged during debriefing. The military vessel pulled alongside the Nordkapp with professional precision. Armed personnel in Arctic gear rappelled to our deck while others maintained overwatch positions from their ship's rails. They moved with the efficiency of a unit that had performed this operation many times before. Commander North was exactly what I'd expected. Mid-40s, weathered face, eyes that revealed nothing. He wore no visible rank insignia, but his bearing suggested senior military authority. Mr. Grant, he said, approaching our equipment setup, I understand you've been conducting deep-sea sensing operations in this area. Oceanographic research, fully documented and legally authorized. What did you find? Thermal anomalies consistent with underwater volcanic activity. Some unusual mineral formations. Nothing outside the range of normal Arctic geology. Commander North studied me carefully. Your submersible spent considerable time at depth. What exactly did it record? Standard oceanographic data, temperature profiles, salinity measurements, geological mapping. I'd like to review that data. I'd like to see a warrant. This is a national security matter, Mr. Grant. Warrants don't apply. Whose national security? Norwegian? American? Because I'm not sure which jurisdiction applies in international waters. Commander North gestured to one of his personnel who immediately began connecting portable equipment to our computer systems. All data storage devices will be impounded pending security review. On what grounds? On the grounds that your research activities have uncovered materials relevant to ongoing classified operations. What materials? That information is classified. I watched them download our expedition records with a mixture of frustration and fascination. These people had been prepared for exactly this scenario. They knew what we were looking for, and they knew we'd find it. Commander, I said, how long have you been monitoring this area? That information is classified. How long have you known about the underwater structures? That information is also classified. Then let me ask you something that isn't classified. What happens to us now? Commander North paused in his review of our equipment. That depends on your willingness to cooperate with ongoing security requirements. Meaning? Meaning you have two options. Option 1, we impound all your equipment and data under maritime security provisions. You're detained pending investigation, and your expedition personnel face charges for unauthorized sensing activities in restricted waters. What's option 2? Option 2, you accept a consulting agreement with appropriate compensation. Your expedition is reclassified as contractor support for authorized research, and everyone goes home with enhanced security clearances and non-disclosure obligations. I looked at Rhea and Holt, both of whom were carefully not expressing opinions about deals with mysterious military commanders. What kind of compensation? Full reimbursement of expedition costs plus a research consulting fee that should more than cover any financial inconvenience. How much more? Commander North smiled for the first time since boarding. Let's say your inheritance just doubled, Mr. Grant. And the non-disclosure obligations? Standard classified research protocols. You don't discuss your findings with unauthorized personnel. You don't publish without security review. And you don't conduct follow-up research without appropriate coordination. For how long? Indefinitely. I thought about Dad, about 15 years of weekend anomaly hunting, about gravitational lows that had led us to the most important discovery in human history. Then I thought about spending the rest of my life in a military detention facility for asking the wrong questions. I'll need the terms in writing. Of course. My legal team will have contracts ready by the time we reach port. What about my expedition team? Separate agreements tailored to their individual involvement levels. Commander North's personnel had finished downloading our computer systems. One of them approached with a tablet showing the data transfer summary. "Complete copy acquired," he reported. "All storage media secured." "What about the submersible?" I asked. "Odin 3 will be transported to appropriate facilities for detailed analysis. You'll receive a full technical report once security review is complete." "When?" "That timeline is classified." I realised we were negotiating the terms of our own capture, but the alternative was probably worse. Whatever we'd found in that underwater cavern, it was important enough to trigger immediate military response and substantial financial incentives for silence. "I'll take option 2, I decided. "Excellent choice, Mr. Grant." The voyage back to Longyearbyen took 18 hours. Commander North's personnel maintained polite but constant supervision, while his legal team prepared our consultation contracts via satellite communication. By the time we reached port, I had a 40-page document that essentially made me a classified contractor for unspecified research activities. The compensation was exactly as promised. Full expedition reimbursement plus a consulting fee that added another $240 million to my bank account. In exchange, I agreed to discuss our Arctic findings only with authorised personnel and to conduct no further research in the area without explicit approval. Rhea and Holt received similar agreements scaled to their involvement levels, both signed without lengthy deliberation. 30 years in the Navy, Holt said as we prepared to fly back to civilization, and I've never seen anything like what happened down there. What do you think it was? I think some questions are worth more money than answers, son. Rhea was more conflicted about the non-disclosure agreement, but ultimately pragmatic about the alternatives. I wanted to publish, she admitted. This discovery could revolutionise our understanding of Arctic geology. Maybe it still will eventually, or maybe it gets buried in classified files forever. 3 months after returning from the Arctic, I received an unexpected package at my Burlington workshop. No return address, but the contents were immediately familiar. A complete technical analysis of Odin 3's sensor data, along with high-resolution images that hadn't been in our original downloads. The images showed details we'd missed during the expedition. The underwater cavern was even larger than we'd mapped, with multiple chambers extending kilometres in all directions. The monitoring equipment we'd encountered was part of a vast network that seemed to cover the entire cavity system. Most significantly, the analysis included acoustic data that Odin 3 had recorded but hadn't transmitted during the expedition. Structured sound patterns that suggested not just artificial generation, but something approaching communication protocols. The final page of the technical report contained a handwritten note. "Your father's second letter. Check the family office safe." I drove to Boston that same day. The Grant Capital offices were exactly as Dad had left them, including his personal safe behind the conference room oil painting. Inside, along with various family documents, I found an envelope marked "Open after Arctic Expedition." Dad's familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, you found what we were looking for." The frequency codes below match signals detected at the target coordinates in 1987, 1994, and 2003. Previous expeditions were discontinued for national security reasons. The anomalies are real, Evan. They're also not natural. Use this information wisely. Below the note, a series of numeric codes that exactly match the acoustic signatures Odin 3 had detected from those mysterious monitoring devices. Dad had known. Somehow he'd known exactly what we would find in that underwater cavern, and he'd planned for me to discover it using his inheritance money. The question was, what did he expect me to do with the knowledge? I spent weeks researching the frequency codes, eventually tracing them through declassified military communications protocols to a series of classified Arctic expeditions dating back to the 1960s. Each expedition had apparently discovered similar acoustic anomalies at various high-latitude locations, and each had been terminated under national security provisions. The pattern was clear. Someone had been systematically investigating these underwater anomalies for decades, and someone else had been systematically suppressing the results. 6 months after our expedition, I received a visitor at my workshop, a woman in her 50s, professional appearance, credentials identifying her as Patricia Wells from the Congressional Budget Office. Mr. Grant, I'm investigating irregularities in classified research funding over the past 30 years. Your Arctic expedition has come to our attention. My expedition was conducted under full legal authority in international waters. I'm not questioning the legality, I'm questioning the aftermath. Specifically, the consulting payments you received from Northern Command. She showed me financial records that shouldn't have existed, details of the compensation agreement, the non-disclosure terms, even classified excerpts from Odin 3's sensor data. These payments appear to be part of a pattern of suppressing civilian research into Arctic anomalies. We've identified 17 similar incidents over the past 20 years. What do you want from me? Information? What did you actually find down there? I studied her credentials again, ran them through government verification databases, confirmed her identity and authority. Patricia Wells was legitimate congressional oversight, which meant she had access to classified materials and protection from standard security restrictions. I found proof that we're not alone, I said finally. Explain. I told her everything. The underwater cavern, the monitoring equipment, the time differential, the frequency codes that matched Dad's historical data. She listened without interruption, taking detailed notes. The acoustic signatures suggest active intelligence, I concluded. Something has been operating in these Arctic caverns for decades, possibly centuries, and our government has been covering it up. Not just our government. This appears to be a coordinated international effort involving NATO partners, and probably others. Why? That's what we're trying to determine. Patricia Wells left me with a secure communication device and instructions to document everything I could remember about the expedition. 2 weeks later, she returned with information that changed my perspective entirely. The monitoring equipment your submersible encountered wasn't suppressing your research, she explained. It was facilitating it. Someone down there wanted you to find them. Based on what evidence? Based on this. She showed me a photograph that made my hands shake. Odin 3, sitting in some kind of maintenance facility, but not any facility I recognised. The submersible had been modified extensively, upgraded with technology that looked decades ahead of current capabilities. Where was this taken? We're not entirely sure, but we believe your submersible was returned to the surface intentionally, with enhanced capabilities and a message. What message? The mineral deposits on Odin 3's hull weren't random formations. They're a mathematical sequence, prime numbers arranged in a spiral pattern that corresponds to galactic coordinates. Coordinates to what? That's classified above my level, but congressional oversight has determined that the suppression protocols are counterproductive. We're recommending full disclosure and open research collaboration. With who? With whoever's been waiting down there for us to figure out how to communicate properly. 1 year after our Arctic expedition, the official story broke simultaneously in major newspapers worldwide. The headlines varied, but the content was consistent. Scientists discover advanced technology in Arctic Ocean. International expedition confirms non-human intelligence. Government reveals decades of contact protocols. My role in the discovery was publicly acknowledged, along with RIA's geological analysis and Holt's logistical expertise. The non-disclosure agreements were officially voided as part of the Transparency Initiative. 6 months after disclosure, I received an invitation that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. The newly established Arctic Research Coordination Centre requested my participation in the first official joint expedition to what they now called the Cavity Network, a system of underwater chambers that apparently extended throughout the Arctic Ocean basin. We've identified 47 separate cavity systems, explained Patricia Wells, now serving as civilian oversight coordinator for the project. Each contains a monitoring equipment similar to what you encountered, and all are broadcasting the same mathematical sequences. Are they responding to communication attempts? Yes, we've established basic mathematical exchanges with 17 sites. The responses suggest distributed intelligence, multiple entities coordinating their communications across vast distances. What do they want? Near as we can tell, they want us to develop interstellar navigation capabilities. The coordinate sequences they're transmitting point to potentially habitable systems within 50 light years of Earth. They're giving us directions. They're giving us an invitation. The second expedition launched in October, 18 months after our original discovery. This time, instead of a single modified submersible, we deployed a fleet of communication platforms equipped with quantum entanglement transmitters and artificial intelligence translation protocols. I watched from the surface as our equipment descended into the cavity network, carrying humanity's first formal message to a non-human intelligence. The message was simple: we are ready to learn. The response came within minutes, not as acoustic signals or mathematical sequences, but as a direct quantum data stream that bypassed all our recording equipment and spoke directly to human consciousness. The voice, if it could be called that, carried concepts rather than words. Welcome. Long waiting. Time for next journey. Stars calling. Ready together? Standing on the deck of our research vessel, watching Aurora Borealis dance across the Arctic sky, I thought about Dad and his weekend anomaly hunting, about gravitational lows that had led to the most important moment in human history. Yes, I whispered to the Arctic night. We're ready. Deep below us, in caverns that had waited centuries for this conversation, ancient intelligences began preparing for humanity's introduction to a galaxy that was far more crowded, far more wonderful, and far more welcoming than we had ever dared imagine. The real journey was just beginning. Welcome back to Sleep Theories, where we explore the mysteries that lurk in the shadows of our world. Tonight's tale comes from the classified depths of military black sites, where miraculous healing technology and alien exchanges collide with secrets that powerful forces would kill to protect. But before we dive into this chilling account of hidden cures and impossible machines, remember to leave your own mysterious video ideas in the comments below. Your suggestions fuel these midnight journeys into the unknown. Special thanks to DXD232 for inspiring tonight's story. And if these tales of suppressed miracles and government conspiracies send the right kind of shivers down your spine, hit that like button and subscribe to Sleep Theories for more stories that blur the line between fact and nightmare. The morphine drip made a soft clicking sound every few seconds, marking time in the sterile hospital room like a metronome of mortality. Daniel Ross sat beside his father's bed, watching the old man's chest rise and fall in shallow breaths. Outside, Baltimore rain streaked the windows, turning the city lights into blurred watercolours. "Danny," his father whispered, eyes suddenly wide and lucid despite the heavy medication. Colonel James Ross had served 30 years in the Air Force Medical Corps, seen things most doctors never would. But this look in his eyes was different. Not pain, not fear, something else. "I'm here, Dad." Daniel leaned closer, taking his father's cold hand. "There are machines," the Colonel's voice cracked. "Machines that can fix anything, but you'll never see them. They keep them locked away." Daniel squeezed his father's hand gently. "It's okay, Dad. Just rest." "No." The intensity made Daniel flinch. "Listen to me." "Right, Patterson. Level 7. The pods. They heal everything. Everything, Danny. But they'll never let us have them. Never let the people know." The heart monitor began its irregular beeping. Nurses rushed in. Daniel was pushed back as they worked, his father's final words echoing in his mind. Within minutes, Colonel James Ross was gone, taking his secrets with him. For months afterward, Daniel told himself it was just the morphine talking. Deathbed hallucinations. His father had been a practical man, a man of science. The idea of miracle healing machines hidden away by the government was conspiracy theory nonsense. But sometimes, late at night in his apartment, Daniel would remember the absolute certainty in his father's eyes, and he would wonder. Chapter 1. The Leak. 18 months after his father's death, Daniel Ross found himself in a place he'd never imagined. Deep underground, beneath a nondescript office building in Bethesda, Maryland, his biomedical engineering firm had landed a defense subcontract: upgrade the cooling systems for server farms at various government facilities. Boring work, but it paid well. The facility manager, a nervous man named Peterson, led him through endless beige corridors. "Everything down here is classified," Peterson said for the third time. "You see nothing. You say nothing." "Just here for the HVAC systems," Daniel replied, hefting his diagnostic equipment. They reached server room 7, and Peterson unlocked 3 separate security doors. "You've got 2 hours. I'll be right outside." The room hummed with the white noise of 1,000 cooling fans. Daniel got to work, checking temperature readings and airflow patterns. It was while crawling behind a server rack that he first saw them, fibre optic cables running into a panel marked with warnings in 3 languages. But it wasn't the warnings that caught his eye, it was the label HMP-PODV, 3.1 Network Interface. Daniel's hand stilled. Pod. His father's word echoed across 18 months of grief. He should have left it alone, should have finished his work and walked away. But his father's voice whispered in his memory, and before he could stop himself, Daniel was tracing the cables to their source, a secured server cabinet with a lock that took him less than a minute to bypass. His government contracts had required certain skills. Inside, stacks of drives blinked with activity. A terminal screen showed active file transfers. Daniel plugged in his diagnostic tablet, telling himself he was just checking for cooling efficiency. The lie tasted bitter even as he thought it. Files cascaded across his screen. Most were encrypted, but the headers were visible. Cellular Reatomization Protocols version 7.3. Holographic Medical Pod Deployment Guidelines. Patient Recovery Metrics. Q3 2024. Technology Exchange Program, HLT clearance only. His hand shook as he initiated a download to his tablet's hidden partition. Gigabytes of data flowed across the connection. Schematics, video files, documents stamped with classifications he'd never seen before. One document caught his eye. Initial Technology Transfer Agreement. October 1971. The header bore no agency logo, just 3 letters, HLT. The document detailed the acquisition of non-terrestrial medical rehabilitation systems and their integration into select defence medical facilities. Non-terrestrial. Daniel's mouth went dry. The video file finished downloading. Against every instinct screaming at him to stop, he opened it. The timestamp showed last week. A medical facility, all white walls and clean lines. A soldier, no, what was left of a soldier, was wheeled into frame. IED victim, the chart notation read. Missing right arm, severe burns covering 60% of his body. They placed him in something that looked like a large capsule made of frosted glass. Blue light emanated from within, and Daniel could see something happening to the man's body. The footage was time-lapsed, 4 hours compressed into 30 seconds. When the pod opened, the soldier stepped out. Whole, not healed, not scarred, whole, as if the injuries had never happened. "What are you doing?" Daniel spun around. Peterson stood in the doorway, face drained of colour. "I was checking the dash. You were checking nothing." Peterson's hand moved to his hip, where Daniel now noticed a sidearm. "Step away from the terminal. Now!" Daniel raised his hands, tablet tucked against his palm. "Look, I didn't mean to." "Shut up!" Peterson pulled out a phone, never taking his eyes off Daniel. "This is Station 7. We have a breach. Level 4, send a containment team." He hung up and gestured with the gun. "Sit down. Don't move, don't speak. Maybe you'll live through this." Daniel sat, mind racing. The tablet pressed against his palm, its hidden partition full of impossible secrets. In 5 minutes, maybe less, men in black suits would arrive. He'd disappear into some hole, or worse, unless... "My tablet," Daniel said quietly. "It's uploading everything to an encrypted server. Has been for the last 10 minutes. If I don't enter a code every hour, it all goes public." Peterson's face went from pale to grey. "You're lying." Graham Technologies Level 9 server farm. Partition 77 Alpha. Check it yourself. Daniel met his eyes steadily. "Or we can make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "I walk out of here. You report a false alarm. Nobody has to know what I saw. They'll never. They will if you sell it right. Power surge triggered the alarm. You responded per protocol. Everything's secure. Daniel stood slowly. Or we can wait for your containment team, and I can tell them about the 3 terabytes of classified data about to hit WikiLeaks in 52 minutes. Peterson's gun wavered. Above them, footsteps echoed, multiple sets, moving fast. Decide, Daniel said. Now. For a long moment they stared at each other. Then Peterson holstered his weapon and grabbed his radio. Station 7. False alarm. Repeat. False alarm. Power surge in server room 7 triggered security protocol. Scene is secure. The footsteps above slowed, stopped. A garbled response came through the radio. Copy that, Peterson said. Returning to normal operations. He turned to Daniel, face twisted with fear and fury. Get out! Now. If I ever see you again... Daniel didn't wait to hear the threat. He grabbed his equipment and walked. Didn't run. Walked. Out of the server room, up the stairs, through the lobby. Only when he reached his van did he allow himself to breathe. The tablet burned against his palm. 3 terabytes of impossibilities. 3 terabytes of proof. His father had been right. Chapter 2. Chasing Proof. Daniel's apartment in Silver Spring had never felt smaller. He'd covered the windows with blackout curtains, disabled his internet router, and pulled the battery from his phone. The tablet lay on his kitchen table like a live grenade, its screen dark but somehow still radiating menace. For 3 days he didn't touch it. He called in sick to work, ignored the increasingly urgent voicemails from his boss. He barely slept, starting at every car door slam, every footstep in the hallway. They would come for him. Peterson's deal had bought time, nothing more. But on the 4th night, with a bottle of whiskey for courage and his sister's photo for motivation, Daniel finally powered on the tablet. He had to know, had to understand what his father had died trying to tell him. The files painted a picture that defied belief. Medical holographic pods, med beds, as some documents called them, had been in limited use since 1971. The technology's origin was carefully obscured, referenced only as Technology Exchange Program, with that recurring HLT classification. But it was the capabilities that made Daniel's hands shake. Complete cellular regeneration, real-time DNA repair and optimization, reversal of aging at the cellular level, regeneration of lost limbs and organs, elimination of all known pathogens and cancers, restoration of neural pathways in brain injury patients. The video files were even more staggering. Paralyzed patients walking, terminal cancer victims restored to perfect health, a woman who appeared to be in her 70s entering a pod and emerging looking 30 years younger, her medical scans confirming the impossible. Her telomeres had actually lengthened. One document outlined the locations, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, as his father had said, a facility beneath Cheyenne Mountain, another in a sub-basement of Walter Reed, dozens of sites, each with between 2 and 10 operational pods. Another file made his stomach churn. Population impact projections. If the technology was released publicly, the document warned, the results would be catastrophic. Healthcare industry collapse, pension system failure as lifespans extended indefinitely, overpopulation, resource depletion, social chaos. Controlled deployment only, the summary concluded. Tier 1 personnel and critical assets only. Public disclosure remains Level 9 prohibited. Daniel poured another whiskey, his mind reeling. They had the cure for everything, and they were keeping it locked away. How many people had died while these machines sat idle? How many had suffered? His sister's face stared at him from the photo. Emma, 3 years younger, diagnosed with ALS 6 months ago. The doctors gave her 2 years, maybe 3. Traditional medicine offered nothing but management of symptoms, a slow decline into paralysis and death. But these machines... Daniel opened his laptop, routing through multiple VPNs and proxy servers. He had to know if anyone else knew, if there were others who had seen behind the curtain. The surface web yielded nothing but conspiracy theories and New Age nonsense. But deeper, in forums that required special browsers and passwords bought with cryptocurrency, he found whispers. A thread titled, "Has anyone else seen the pods?" caught his eye. The original poster claimed his uncle had worked maintenance at Wright Patterson in the 80s. He said there were rooms that required special clearance just to clean. Once a door was left open. He saw someone wheeled in on a gurney, missing both legs from an accident. Came out walking an hour later. They transferred him the next day, told him he'd imagined it. Another user, handle Deep Throat 77, wrote, "Friend of mine worked private security for a billionaire. Guy was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, given 3 months. Flew to Switzerland, came back 2 weeks later completely clean. Doctors couldn't explain it. My friend said they didn't go to any hospital, just some underground facility in the mountains. Daniel created an account, Truthseeker34. He posted carefully, vaguely. I've seen documentation suggesting advanced medical technology being withheld. Looking for others with direct knowledge. Serious inquiries only." Within an hour, his encrypted inbox had 3 messages. 2 were clearly paranoid fantasies, but the third... "I know what you've seen," it read. "My name is Marcus Brady. I worked level 7 medical at Wright Patterson from 2018 to 2023. I've used the pods. I've seen what they can do. And I know why they'll never let us have them. Meet me tomorrow, noon, Lincoln Memorial. Come alone. Look for the man feeding pigeons near the reflecting pool." Daniel stared at the message. It could be a trap. Probably was a trap. But if this Marcus was real, if he had actually worked with the pods... He thought of Emma growing weaker each day, thought of his father's dying words. He had to take the chance. The next morning, Daniel took every precaution he could think of. Changed metro lines 3 times. Doubled back through Georgetown, wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, kept his head down. By the time he reached the Lincoln Memorial, his shirt was soaked with nervous sweat. The reflecting pool stretched before him, tourists wandering its length despite the October chill. And there, on a bench near the middle, sat a middle-aged Asian man tossing breadcrumbs to a cluster of pigeons. Daniel approached slowly, hands visible. The man didn't look up. "Beautiful day," Daniel said, the agreed-upon phrase. "For feeding birds," Marcus Brady replied. He patted the bench. "Sit. Don't look at me directly. We have maybe 10 minutes before their facial recognition picks us up." Daniel sat, pulling out his own bag of breadcrumbs. The price of admission to any Washington Park bench. "You've really used them? The pods? 17 times. Different patients, different conditions. I've seen them regrow a man's liver, cure stage 4 brain cancer, reverse paralysis from a severed spinal cord." Marcus's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. "And each time I had to watch them wheel the patient away afterward, tell their families they died on the table, create false death certificates, because the technology doesn't exist." "Why? Why hide it?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "You've seen the projection documents, haven't you? About societal collapse? Yeah, but it's not about society. It's about control, power, money." Marcus threw more crumbs, watching the pigeons fight over them. What happens to a $2 trillion healthcare industry when disease becomes obsolete? What happens to pharmaceutical companies when one session in a pod replaces a lifetime of medications? What happens to the insurance industry, the medical device industry, the entire economic ecosystem built on human suffering? People are dying. The wrong people, according to them. Marcus's voice hardened. The pods aren't idle. They run every day. For the elite, for key government personnel, for people who can pay 8 or 9 figures for a session. There's a facility in Switzerland completely off the books. Saudi princes, tech billionaires, heads of state. They all know. They all use them. They stay young, healthy, immortal, while the rest of us age and die on schedule. Daniel felt sick. There has to be a way to expose this, to force their hand. "You think you're the first to try?" Marcus turned slightly and Daniel glimpsed a face marked by exhaustion and fear. "I had a colleague, Patricia Martinez. Brilliant woman. She tried to document everything, gathered evidence for 2 years. Know where she is now?" Daniel shook his head. "Neither do I. She disappeared 3 months ago. Official story is she had a mental breakdown, committed suicide. But I saw the security footage from that night. Black SUVs, a team in tactical gear. They scrubbed her entire existence, apartment, digital footprint, everything. Even her family thinks she's dead. Then why are you talking to me? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Because I'm dying. Lung cancer, ironically enough. And they won't let me use the pods. I know too much, but not enough to be valuable. So I'm dead anyway. He stood, scattering the remaining crumbs. My advice: forget what you've seen. Delete those files. Go back to your life, because if you pursue this, you'll end up like Patricia, or like me. He started to walk away, then paused. Unless, Daniel stood. Unless what? Unless you're smarter than us. Unless you find a way to use the system against itself. Marcus pulled out a business card, dropped it on the bench. That's a cleaner service. Call them, ask for a deep clean special. They'll give you an address. What you do with it is up to you. Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd of tourists. Daniel picked up the card, just a phone number, nothing else. He looked around, suddenly aware of every security camera, every passing jogger who might be something more. 10 minutes. Marcus had said they had 10 minutes before facial recognition picked them up. Daniel pulled his cap lower and walked quickly toward the metro, the card burning in his pocket. Behind him, the pigeons fought over the last of the breadcrumbs, oblivious to the weight of the secrets that had just been shared. That night, Emma called. Her voice was weaker, words slightly slurred. The disease was progressing faster than expected. The doctors wanted to start experimental trials, 1,000-to-1 shots that might buy her months at best. Daniel held the phone, listening to his sister try to sound optimistic, and made his decision. He would find a way into one of those facilities. He would save Emma, or die trying. Chapter 3. Into the facility. The cleaner service turned out to be a laundromat in Anacostia, the kind of place where questions weren't asked and cash was king. Daniel walked in at exactly 3 p.m. as instructed, and asked for the deep clean special. The woman behind the counter, hair in curlers and chewing gum like her life depended on it, didn't even look up. Dryer 7. Your clothes will be ready in an hour. Daniel found dryer 7 running empty. Taped inside was an envelope containing a single sheet of paper, GPS coordinates, a date 2 weeks away, and instructions that made his blood run cold. Decommissioned medical facility, Nevada test site. Maintenance window 0200 to 0600 hours. Pod 7 operational status unknown. Building 447, sub-level 3. Guard rotation changes at 0247 and 0423, no second chances. 2 weeks. Daniel spent them in fevered preparation. He liquidated his retirement accounts, maxed out credit cards, assembled equipment he'd need. Night vision goggles, electronic lockpicks, a signal jammer he bought from a Russian on the dark web, and most importantly, credentials. His years working defence contracts had taught him the bureaucracy's weakness. Paperwork. The right forms, the right badges, the right confidence, and you could walk into almost anywhere. He crafted an identity. Daniel Morrison, biomedical contractor with Theoretical Systems Inc., a shell company that existed only in Delaware filing documents, and a website he built in 3 hours. The drive to Nevada took 2 days. He stopped only for gas, sleeping in his van at rest stops, paranoid that every state trooper was looking for him. By the time he reached the coordinates, 60 miles northwest of Las Vegas in the middle of nowhere, exhaustion and adrenaline had him running on pure determination. The facility looked abandoned. Chain-link fence topped with old razor wire, warning signs faded by decades of desert sun. But Daniel's night vision showed what casual observers would miss. Fresh tire tracks, security cameras painted to look rusted, and a guard shack that was definitely not empty. He waited until 2300, then drove to the gate with confidence he didn't feel. The guard, half asleep and clearly not expecting visitors, barely glanced at the work orders Daniel had forged. Theoretical Systems, Daniel said, handing over his credentials. Emergency maintenance on the cooling systems. Should have been here yesterday but got held up in Vegas. The guard squinted at the paperwork, then at his computer screen. For a heart-stopping moment, Daniel thought it was over. Then the guard shrugged. Building 447's that way, park around back, you know the drill, no photos, no phone calls, no wandering around, in and out. Copy that. Daniel drove through, hands steady despite the sweat running down his back. Building 447 looked like every other military structure from the 1960s. Concrete block, small windows, designed to survive nuclear war. But the keypad lock was modern, as were the cameras covering every angle. Daniel parked where the building itself blocked the van from view and got to work. The lockpicks got him through the first door. The signal jammer killed the cameras for a precious 90 seconds, long enough to reach the stairwell. Down he went, following memorised floor plans, until he reached sub-level 3. The difference was immediate. Gone were the crumbling concrete walls and flickering fluorescence. This level was modern, clean, medical. The air smelled of ozone and something else, something that made his skin prickle with static electricity. Daniel followed the corridor, each door labelled with alphanumeric codes that meant nothing to him. Then he saw it. Pod Bay 7. Authorised personnel only. The door was reinforced steel with a biometric scanner. Daniel's picks were useless here, but fortune favours the desperate, or the observant. A medical cart sat nearby, and tucked beneath supplies was an access card on a retractable lanyard. Some technician's oversight would be Daniel's salvation. The card worked. The door hissed open, and Daniel stepped into impossibility. The room was vast, easily 60 feet across. In the centre sat 7 pods arranged in a circle like techno-Stonehenge. 6 were covered with protective sheeting powered down, but the 7th... It glowed with soft blue light, humming with energy that seemed to vibrate in Daniel's bones. The pod itself was beautiful in an alien way. Smooth curves of some material that looked like pearl mixed with chrome, no visible seams or joints. A control panel nearby showed readouts in symbols that hurt to look at directly, though English translation scrolled beneath. Daniel approached slowly, pulled out his phone to record. This was it. Proof the world needed to see. Then he heard voices in the corridor. Told them Pod 7 was acting up again. Frequency alignment's off by 0.3%. At this hour? Christ. Let me guess. Priority patient tomorrow? Senator something or other. Pancreatic cancer. The usual last-minute emergency when they realise money can't buy immortality through traditional channels. Daniel's mind raced. The guards would change rotation in, he checked his watch, 6 minutes. But these technicians were here now. He looked around frantically, spotted an observation booth elevated above the pod bay. He sprinted for the ladder, hauling himself up just as the main door opened. 2 men in white coats entered, arguing about frequency modulation and dimensional phase shifting, terms that meant nothing to Daniel but which they discussed like garage mechanics, talking about engine timing. They approached Pod 7, one pulling out what looked like an oversized tablet covered in those same painful symbols. There's the problem, one said. The crystalline matrix is misaligned. Must have happened during the last age regression session. Those always stress the system. How long to fix? 20 minutes, maybe 30. Good thing we caught it. Another day and it might have started randomly teleporting patients again. Randomly teleporting? Daniel filed that impossibility away with all the others. For 20 minutes he watched them work, recording everything. They opened panels on the pod that revealed internal components unlike anything in his engineering experience. Geometries that shouldn't exist. Materials that seemed to phase in and out of visibility. Energy patterns that made his eyes water. Then one of them said something that made his blood freeze. "Hey Richardson, you smell that?" "Smell what?" "Like sweat." B.O. When's the last time anyone cleaned in here? They both looked around, faces suspicious. Daniel pressed himself flat against the booth floor, not daring to breathe. Below, one technician walked the perimeter of the room while the other continued working. "Probably just the ventilation system," Richardson said finally. "This whole building's falling apart. Except for our little miracle machines, of course." They finished their work, ran diagnostics that lit up the pod with patterns of light that seemed to reach into dimensions Daniel couldn't name. Then, finally, they left. Daniel waited another 5 minutes before climbing down. His legs shook, but he forced himself to approach the pod, to touch its surface. It was warm, almost alive, pulsing gently like a slow heartbeat. On impulse, he pressed his hand to what looked like a reader panel. The pod responded immediately, symbols cascading across its surface. One resolved into English. Scan complete. Subject shows 17 cellular anomalies. Treatment time 4.7 hours. Initiate 17 anomalies. Daniel thought of every ache, every pain, every minor health issue he'd ignored over the years. The pod knew them all from a single touch. For a moment he almost pressed yes, almost climbed inside to see what miracles felt like. Then he thought of Emma dying by degrees in a hospital bed. This wasn't for him. But maybe... Daniel yanked out his phone, started photographing everything. The control panels, the pod itself, serial numbers, anything that might help him understand how to get Emma here. Or better yet, how to get one of these pods to her. He was so focused on documenting that he almost missed the soft chime from the door, almost missed the sound of footsteps. I told you someone would come eventually. Daniel spun around. A woman stood in the doorway, mid-50s, silver hair in a neat bun, wearing a white coat with no identification. She didn't look surprised to see him. "Mr. Ross," she continued, stepping into the room. "Oh yes, we know who you are. We've known since you downloaded those files in Bethesda. Did you really think Mr. Peterson's deal would hold?" Daniel backed toward the pod, mind racing for exits that didn't exist. "Who are you?" "Dr. Elizabeth Kane. I run this facility and several others." She moved with calm confidence, no fear of the intruder in her domain. "I must say, you've shown remarkable resourcefulness. Most people who stumble onto our secrets simply disappear. But you're different. If you're going to kill me..." "Kill you?" She laughed, a sound like silver bells. "Mr. Ross, why would we kill someone with your skills, your determination, your very personal motivation?" She gestured to the pod. "We want to save your sister. We understand that drive better than you might think. Then let me use it. Just once. Please." Kane studied him with eyes that seemed older than her face suggested. "The pods aren't just medical devices, Mr. Ross. They're, let's call them bridges, to technologies and capabilities that human minds weren't designed to understand. Each use requires precise calibration, careful monitoring. One mistake and your sister doesn't just die. She gets scattered across dimensions we don't have names for. But it can save her. Oh yes, complete cellular reconstruction, perfect health. She could live another century, maybe two." Kane moved to the control panel, fingers dancing across symbols. "But everything has a price." "I have money. Not that kind of price." The pod hummed louder, responding to her commands. "Tell me, Mr. Ross, what do you know about the Technology Exchange Program?" "Just references in the files. Non-terrestrial origin, 1971. 1971 was when we formalized it. But contact began earlier. They came to us. Beings from elsewhere. Offered us technologies beyond imagination. Medical pods, energy systems, propulsion methods that make rockets look like stone wheels." She turned to face him. "All they wanted in exchange was test subjects." Daniel felt his stomach drop. Test subjects? Nothing sinister. They needed to understand human physiology, our DNA, our potential for evolution. Every person who uses a pod contributes data to their research. In exchange, we get to heal, to extend life, to touch godhood, if only briefly. And the public? Would panic, would demand access, would destroy the careful balance we've maintained for 50 years. Kane's expression hardened. 7 billion people with access to immortality? The planet would be stripped bare in a generation. Wars over resources would make our current conflicts look like playground squabbles. No, Mr. Ross, the pods remain controlled. They must. So you'll let the wrong people die to save the right ones. We let nature take its course for most. We intervene when the greater good demands it. Leaders who maintain stability, scientists on the verge of breakthroughs, artists whose work elevates humanity. She paused. and occasionally we make exceptions. The pod's hum reached a crescendo, then settled into a rhythm like breathing. Kane nodded, satisfied. "Your sister," she said. "Emma Ross, ALS, stage 2. Perhaps 18 months before complete paralysis. 6 months after that." She shrugged eloquently. "Don't!" Daniel's voice cracked. "Just don't. I'm offering you a choice. Your sister can use Pod 7. Full treatment, complete restoration. She'll wake up healthier than she's been in years, with no memory of the procedure. As far as she knows, it will be a miracle recovery. Spontaneous remission. It happens. What's the catch? You work for us. Your engineering skills, your ability to think outside conventional paradigms, your proven discretion. We need people like you. You'll help maintain the pods, upgrade their systems, perhaps even expand the network. In exchange, Emma lives. You get a generous salary, and eventually access to the pods yourself." Daniel stared at her, then at the waiting pod. "And if I refuse?" "Then you leave here with your photos and videos. You try to expose us. Maybe you upload some files before we stop you. A few thousand people believe, the rest mock you as another conspiracy theorist. Meanwhile, your sister dies slowly, painfully, knowing her brother could have saved her but chose his principles instead." The silence stretched between them. Daniel thought of his father, dying with the truth on his lips, of Marcus Brady, cast aside when no longer useful, of all the people who'd suffered and died while these miracles hummed in secret bunkers. Then he thought of Emma, her laugh, her fierce determination even as her body betrayed her, the way she'd held his hand at their father's funeral and whispered, "At least the pain is over." "When?" he asked quietly. Kane smiled, victory and perhaps sympathy in her expression. "Tomorrow night. We'll arrange her transfer here. A specialist consultation in Las Vegas. All very routine. She'll wake up in a private clinic. Diagnosis reversed. Doctors baffled but delighted. And you'll report to our facility in Maryland on Monday to begin your new career." She held out a tablet. "Standard employment contract. Sign here." Daniel took the tablet with numbed fingers. The contract was dozens of pages of legal terminology, but the key points were clear: lifetime employment, top secret clearance, penalties for disclosure that started at imprisonment and got worse from there. At the bottom, a single line awaited his signature. He thought of all the people who would continue to suffer, all the lies that would continue to be told, all the principles he was about to betray. Then he signed his name. Kane took the tablet back, nodding with satisfaction. "Welcome to the program, Mr. Ross. Your orientation packet will arrive tomorrow. For now, security will escort you out. Best if you're not here when the morning shift arrives." As if summoned, 2 guards appeared in the doorway, not threatening, just present. Daniel took one last look at Pod 7, glowing with its impossible promise, then followed them out. The drive back to Las Vegas was a blur. By dawn, he was on a plane home, the events of the night feeling like someone else's dream. But the email on his phone was real enough. Consultation scheduled for E. Ross, October 15th, 8 p.m. Transport will arrive at 6 p.m. Please have patient ready. Tomorrow, Emma would enter a pod and exit healed. The price was Daniel's soul to the very system he'd meant to expose. But as he looked out the plane window at the sunrise painting the clouds gold, Daniel found he could live with that. Some prices were worth paying. Chapter 4. The Cover-Up. Daniel had been home less than 4 hours when they came for him. He was sitting at his kitchen table staring at the email about Emma's consultation when the lights flickered. His laptop screen went dark. The refrigerator's hum ceased. Then, with choreographed precision, his apartment door exploded inward. 6 figures in tactical gear stormed in, weapons raised, laser sights painting red dots across Daniel's chest. He raised his hands slowly, mind reeling. This wasn't part of the deal. Daniel Ross! The lead operative's voice was muffled by a tactical mask. "Stay seated. Hands visible. You know why we're here." "There's been a mistake," Daniel said carefully. "I signed the contract. Dr. Kane doesn't run everything, Mr. Ross." A new voice from the doorway. A man in a charcoal suit stepped through the ruined doorframe, picking his way around wood splinters with obvious distaste. "Agent Thorne, National Security Agency. We need to have a conversation." Thorne was everything a government spook should be. Forgettable face, neutral expression, eyes that missed nothing. He pulled out Daniel's kitchen chair and sat across from him, while the tactical team secured the apartment. "Laptop," Thorne said. One of the operatives placed Daniel's computer on the table. "Tablet," that too appeared. "External drives, 3 of them. Cloud storage accounts, 7. Quite the digital hoard you've assembled." I signed. "A contract with a subdivision of a project that may or may not officially exist, depending on which oversight committee you ask." Thorne opened the laptop, typed commands with practiced efficiency. "Dr. Kane operates under certain assumptions about her authority. We're here to correct those assumptions." Daniel watched his files being deleted. Every photo, every video, every downloaded document disappearing into digital oblivion. "You're destroying the evidence." "Evidence of what?" Thorne asked mildly. "You broke into a decommissioned medical facility and found some abandoned equipment. Your photos show empty rooms and obsolete machinery. Your videos capture nothing but shadows and speculation." The laptop screen flickered. Where Daniel's pod footage had been, new files appeared. The same locations, but empty. Dust-covered floors, rusted equipment, abandoned rooms that hadn't seen use in decades. "Deepfake technology has gotten remarkably good," Thorne continued. "Amazing what we can do in post-production. Your originals never existed. You photographed exactly what we're showing you. Nothing." "My sister," Daniel said desperately. "The consultation cancelled." Thorne closed the laptop with a soft click. "Your sister will receive excellent care at Johns Hopkins. Experimental treatments, the best doctors, every conventional therapy available. She might even experience significant improvement. Medicine advances every day, after all. But she'll die. We all die, Mr. Ross. Some sooner than others. That's the natural order." Thorne stood, straightening his tie. "You have 2 choices. Accept reality as we've defined it, and your sister gets the best care money can buy. Continue to chase fantasies and she gets nothing. You get nothing except a padded room where you can tell your stories to people who specialize in delusions." The tactical team was already withdrawing, taking every piece of evidence with them. Daniel's apartment looked like a hurricane had passed through, but he barely noticed. His mind raced, searching for leverage that didn't exist. Dr. Kane promised. Dr. Kane exceeded her authority. She's being reassigned. The Nevada facility is being decommissioned as we speak. Too many security breaches lately. Too many curious engineers thinking they can save the world. Thorne moved toward the door, then paused. "A word of advice. Take the gift we're offering. Your sister gets time, possibly years. You get to keep your freedom, your sanity, your life. That's more than most who dig this deep receive." "And the pods?" Thorne smiled, a thin, humourless expression. "What pods, Mr. Ross? There are no pods. There never were any pods. You had a stressful experience, perhaps a minor breakdown after your father's death. It happens. But you're better now, aren't you? Ready to return to your normal life?" The threat was clear in every word. Daniel nodded slowly, hating himself for the gesture. "Excellent. Someone will be in touch about repairing your door. Oh, and Mr. Ross? We'll be watching. Every email, every search, every conversation. One mention of your delusions and our generosity evaporates. Understood?" Daniel understood. He understood he'd lost. That Emma would suffer and die while miracle cures existed miles beneath the desert. That his father's truth would remain buried with him. Thorne left without another word. Daniel sat in his ruined apartment, surrounded by the debris of his naive hopes, and wondered how many others had sat in similar ruins, silenced by the weight of impossible truths. His phone buzzed. Emma texting him. "Weird news. Got a call from Johns Hopkins. They want me in some cutting-edge trial. Fully funded. Maybe things are looking up." Daniel typed back with numb fingers. "That's wonderful. I'll drive you there myself." He put the phone down and stared at his hands. Somewhere in bunkers and hidden facilities the pods hummed with their alien songs. The elite entered broken and emerged whole. The powerful grasped at immortality while the masses withered on schedule, and Daniel Ross would say nothing, do nothing, be nothing but another silent witness to humanity's greatest secret. The price of his sister's time had just gone up. Chapter 5. The Personal Test. 6 months passed in a haze of careful normalcy. Daniel returned to work, upgrading cooling systems in buildings that definitely didn't house miracle technology. He drove Emma to Hopkins twice a week, watching experimental drugs slow her decline but never stop it. He answered his emails, paid his bills, and gave no sign of the knowledge that burned in his chest like swallowed acid. Agent Thorne had been right about the surveillance. Daniel's electronics were compromised, his apartment bugged, his movements tracked. Twice unmarked cars followed him to work. Once a technician showed up to check his internet connection, spending an hour installing God knew what. Daniel smiled, offered coffee, played the part of a man who'd learned his lesson. But traumatic knowledge once gained cannot be forgotten, and Daniel Ross had always been good at solving problems. Started small. Research conducted on library computers, different locations each time, cash purchases of electronics from pawn shops, conversations with homeless veterans who'd seen things at military bases they couldn't explain. Piece by piece, thread by thread, Daniel wove a new web of information. The pods were real. He'd touched one, felt its alien warmth, and where there was one, there were others. The question was, how to reach them without triggering another visit from Thorne's team. The answer came from an unexpected source. Marcus Brady, the dying man from the Lincoln Memorial, reached out through an intermediary. A flower delivery to Daniel's office with a card reading only, "The cherry blossoms are beautiful this year." The same phrase Chen had mentioned in their brief meeting. Daniel found him in a hospice facility in Arlington, a shadow of the man from 6 months ago. The cancer had progressed brutally, reducing him to skin and determination. "Knew you'd come eventually," Marcus wheezed. "They all do. Can't unsee what we've seen." "They destroyed everything," Daniel said quietly. "Threatened my sister." "Standard playbook." Marcus coughed, specks of blood staining his lips. "But they're not omnipotent. Just careful. And sometimes careful creates patterns." He gestured weakly to a drawer. Inside, Daniel found a single sheet of paper covered in what looked like random numbers and letters. "Transportation logs," Marcus explained. "Took me 3 years to compile. When they move patients to the sites, they use specific vehicles, specific routes. Bureaucracy demands documentation, even for secrets." Daniel studied the paper. Slowly, patterns emerged. Vehicle identification numbers that repeated, GPS coordinates that clustered around certain areas, times and dates that suggested regular schedules. "Tomorrow night," Marcus continued with effort. "Emergency med flight. Baltimore to classified location. Senator's wife. Ovarian cancer. Terminal. Another coughing fit. You want to save someone? That's your window. Security will be minimal. They rely on secrecy, not force. 1 patient, 1 doctor, 2 EMTs, private hangar, Signature Aviation, flight plan lists, medical facility in Richmond. But they'll divert. They always divert." Daniel memorized every detail, then burned the paper in Marcus's presence. The dying man smiled. "Do what I couldn't," he said. "Save 1 person. Prove it's possible. Maybe that's enough." Marcus Brady died 2 days later. The obituary mentioned his service at Wright-Patterson. Nothing more. Another keeper of secrets taken to his grave. But his final gift lived on in Daniel's mind. A chance. A real chance. The next night found Daniel at Baltimore's Signature Aviation facility, dressed in stolen EMT uniform, credentials forged with skills sharpened by desperation. The private hangar buzzed with quiet activity. Rich people fleeing to richer places, their jets fueled by money and privilege. And there, in Hangar 7, a medical transport jet sat waiting. Daniel watched from the shadows as they wheeled her in. A woman in her 60s, unconscious, cancer carving her into a living skeleton. Her husband followed, a senator Daniel recognised from CSPAN, face etched with grief and desperate hope. 2 EMTs as Marcus predicted. 1 doctor, a pilot who stayed with the plane. Daniel waited until the EMTS stepped out for a smoke break, complaining about another midnight run to nowhere. "I swear, these terminal cases all end up at the same place," one said, "but the overtime's killer, so who's asking questions?" Daniel stepped out of the shadows, syringe in hand. "Sorry about this." The sedative worked fast. Both EMTs crumpled before they could cry out. Daniel dragged them behind a fuel truck, took the taller one's jacket and credentials. His hands shook as he boarded the jet. The doctor looked up from the patient. "About time. We're wheels up in 5. Daniel nodded, kept his head down, busied himself with equipment he half understood. The senator sat in the back, staring at his dying wife. He never even looked at the help. The jet lifted off into the night. Daniel watched Baltimore shrink below, knowing he'd crossed a line he could never uncross. But in the medical berth, a dying woman breathed shallow breaths, and somewhere ahead, a pod waited that could save her. He just had to figure out how to save Emma too. The flight took 2 hours. As Marcus had predicted, they diverted, first to Richmond as filed, then west into the mountains of West Virginia. The pilot descended toward what looked like empty forest, until runway lights suddenly blazed to life, revealing a landing strip carved into the mountainside. "Arrival at Mountain Site Echo," the pilot announced. "Medical team stand by for patient transfer." They were met by more medical staff, faces hidden behind surgical masks. The senator was led away by someone in a suit. "Standard intake procedures, sir, you understand." The patient was wheeled toward a building that looked like a ski lodge from outside, but hummed with hidden power. Daniel followed, playing his part until they reached the medical bay. And there they were, 3 pods, identical to the one in Nevada, glowing with that same impossible light. "Which one?" the doctor asked. "Pod 2 is optimal for cellular reconstruction," a technician answered. "Calibrated for oncological intervention. 4 hours for complete remission." They transferred the senator's wife into the pod with practiced efficiency. Daniel watched the displays light up. DNA analysis, cellular mapping, treatment protocols in that painful symbolic language. The pod sealed with a soft hiss, and the woman inside was bathed in blue radiance. "Always gives me the creeps," one of the techs muttered. "Like watching someone get rebuilt from scratch." "Because that's exactly what's happening," the doctor replied. "Every cell analysed, corrected, perfected. She'll walk out of there 20 years younger, biologically speaking." 4 hours! Daniel had 4 hours before they discovered he wasn't supposed to be there. 4 hours to figure out how to get Emma here, or better yet, how to steal one of these pods. He excused himself, bathroom break, and slipped deeper into the facility. His stolen credentials got him through 2 checkpoints before he found what he was looking for. A storage area filled with pod components, spare parts, diagnostic equipment, and there, covered in protective plastic, a partially assembled pod marked Unit 12, pending installation. It would take a truck to move it, teams of technicians to assemble it, power sources he couldn't begin to understand. But as Daniel examined the components, a different plan formed. Not theft, that was impossible, but sabotage? Creating a crisis that demanded emergency evacuation of patients. He was reaching for his phone to photograph the pod specifications when a hand fell on his shoulder. "Mr. Ross, we really must stop meeting like this." Daniel turned to find Dr. Kane, looking no different than she had 6 months ago. If anything, she looked younger. The pods, he realised. She used them regularly. "Security flagged you the moment you boarded," she continued conversationally. "Facial recognition is quite sophisticated these days. Though I must say, the EMT disguise was well done. Poor Marcus would be proud." "You knew Marcus?" "I know everyone who knows about us. It's a very small community." She gestured to armed guards who had materialised in the doorway. "The question is what to do with you now. Agent Thorne would insist on permanent solutions. But I've always been more creative." She led him back to the medical bay where the senator's wife still floated in Pod 2, cancer being methodically erased from her existence. The senator himself stood watching, tears streaming down his face. Hope is a powerful thing, Kane mused. He'll pay anything, do anything to save her, just as you would for Emma. She turned to Daniel. So I'm going to make you the same offer, with modifications. Work for us. Help us expand the network, and Emma gets treated. Refuse, and, well, Thorne's team is already en route. ETA 20 minutes. You tried this before. I offered employment before. Now I'm offering partnership. Her eyes glinted. You've proven you can't be contained, can't be threatened into silence. So instead, we make you complicit. Give you what you want most. Tie you so deeply into the program that exposing us means destroying yourself. Daniel looked at the pod, at the dying woman being reborn inside. And Emma? Can be here tomorrow. Full treatment, complete restoration. All you have to do is say yes, then help us build more. The demand is growing, you see. Too many senators' wives, too many CEOs with terminal diagnoses. We need to expand carefully, quietly. Someone with your skills would be invaluable. Building pods for the elite while everyone else dies. Building bridges to a future where perhaps, eventually, everyone has access. Baby steps, Mr. Ross. Rome wasn't built in a day, and paradise can't be distributed overnight. She checked her watch. 15 minutes until Thorne arrives. He won't offer deals. Choose. Daniel thought of his father, dying with truth on his lips. Thought of Marcus, compiling transportation logs with his last strength. Thought of all the people who'd fought this system and lost. Then he thought of Emma, and made the only choice he could. I'll need a team, he said quietly, and access to the original specifications. Kane smiled like a cat with cream. Done. Welcome to the future, Mr. Ross, however compromised it might be. Chapter 6. The Payoff. The call came at 3 a.m. 2 years later. Daniel sat up in his Arlington penthouse, instantly awake. The encrypted phone, the one only 3 people had the number for, buzzed insistently on his nightstand. Yes. It's time. Kane's voice tense with something he'd never heard before, fear. Thorne knows. About everything. About you. About Emma. About the expansions. Extraction team incoming. You have maybe 10 minutes. Daniel was already moving, grabbing the go-bag he'd kept packed since day one. How? Congressional oversight finally grew teeth. Audit of black budget programs. Someone talked. A pause. I'm sorry, Daniel. We're shutting it all down. Scorched earth protocols. Everyone involved. Disposed of. The line went dead. Daniel allowed himself 5 seconds of despair, then shifted into the exit strategy he'd rehearsed 100 times. Down the service elevator, through the parking garage, into a car registered to someone who didn't exist. As he drove through empty streets, he thought about the last 2 years. Emma walking out of a pod with tears of joy, her body whole and strong. The dozen facilities he'd helped build, hidden in plain sight across the country. The hundreds of patients, always wealthy, always connected, who'd been quietly cured of everything from cancer to spinal injuries. And the data he'd secretly compiled. Every patient, every transaction, every pod specification. Terabytes of proof stored in ways even the NSA couldn't trace. His insurance policy, gathering dust while he played the good soldier. Time to cash it in. Daniel ditched the car at Reagan National, caught the first flight to Miami under one of his prepared identities. From there to Mexico City, paying cash, staying off the grid. By the time Thorne's teams kicked in his penthouse door, he was sipping coffee in a Oaxaca cafe, uploading years of evidence to servers scattered across the globe, but not to WikiLeaks, not to journalists. Daniel had learned the hard way that raw truth was too dangerous, too easy to dismiss or suppress. Instead, he did something smarter. He sold it. The Chinese wanted pod specifications. The Russians wanted patient lists. European pharma companies wanted the cellular regeneration data. Everyone wanted a piece of the miracle, and Daniel parceled it out like a digital drug dealer, always holding back just enough to keep them hungry. Within 6 months, knockoff pods appeared in Shanghai hospitals. Crude, limited, but functional. Moscow announced breakthrough cancer treatments that sounded suspiciously familiar. Switzerland opened discreet clinics offering revolutionary longevity therapies to those who could afford 9-figure fees. The genie was slipping out of the bottle, one expensive wish at a time. Daniel watched it all from a beach in Costa Rica, his own body periodically renewed by a personal pod hidden in a shipping container. Emma visited monthly, her health perfect, her questions carefully deflected. She thought he'd made a fortune in medical consulting, close enough to the truth. Then one evening, as tropical sunset painted the sky, a familiar figure sat down beside him at the beach bar. "Hello, Daniel." Agent Thorne looked older, greyer, like a man watching his life's work crumble. "Enjoying retirement?" "Arrest me or buy me a drink," Daniel replied. "I'm too tired for threats." Thorne signalled the bartender. 2 whiskies appeared. They drank in silence while waves crashed against the shore. 50 years, Thorne said finally. 50 years we kept it contained. Controlled. And you unravelled it all for what? Money? For Emma. For everyone's Emmas. Daniel took another sip. "You were right about the chaos, though. Moscow's fighting Beijing over patent rights to alien technology. 3 pharma CEOs assassinated this year alone. The Saudis are building a pod facility the size of a football stadium. And the original source? Still hidden. Still trading their toys for our data." Daniel smiled bitterly. "Turns out they don't care who uses the pods as long as they get their genetic samples. We were never containing anything, Thorne. We were just middle management." Thorne finished his whiskey and stood. "There's a kill order on you. International scope. 7 figures to whoever brings your head back." "I know. I'm supposed to execute it myself, clean up my own mess." Daniel tensed, but Thorne just dropped money on the bar. "But I'm retiring too. Forced out by the new oversight committee. They want younger blood. People who understand the new reality." He paused. "The reality you created. So what now?" "Now?" Thorne looked out at the ocean. "Now the human race gets to see if it can handle its own potential. God help us all." He walked away, leaving Daniel alone with the sunset and the weight of what he'd done. Somewhere, in hospitals and secret clinics, pods hummed their alien songs. The rich got richer in years as well as dollars. The poor waited for the technology to trickle down, as it always did, eventually. And Daniel Ross, who'd wanted only to save his sister, sat on his tropical beach and wondered if he'd saved the world or doomed it. His phone buzzed. Emma texting pictures from her rock climbing trip. Alive, healthy, happy, worth any price. Daniel ordered another whiskey and watched the stars come out. Tomorrow, another buyer would call. Another piece of paradise would be sold to the highest bidder. The future would inch closer, one transaction at a time. The cure for everything existed. It always had. Now, finally people knew. What they did with that knowledge would determine if humanity's greatest secret became its salvation or its epitaph. But that wasn't Daniel's problem anymore. He'd played his part, for better or worse. The rest was up to them. Epilogue. 5 years later. The 60 Minutes interview would later be called The Moment Everything Changed. "So you're saying these so-called med beds have been in use for over 50 years? Leslie Stahl's voice carried the perfect mix of skepticism and intrigue. The woman across from her, face digitally obscured, voice modulated, nodded. Since 1971, hidden in military installations, private clinics, underground facilities, used exclusively by the elite while millions died from curable diseases. And you know this because I used them, maintained them, helped expand the network." A pause. "My name is Dr. Elizabeth Kane, and I ran the American MedBed program for 12 years. Daniel nearly choked on his coffee. He sat forward in his Swiss hotel room watching the impossible unfold. Kane had gone public. "The technology was given to us," she continued. "Part of an exchange program with entities from elsewhere. In return for limited use of their medical technology, we provided genetic data from human subjects." "Aliens!" Stahl's tone flattened. "You're claiming alien technology. I'm claiming non-terrestrial origin. Call them what you like. The point is we've had the ability to cure any disease, reverse aging, regenerate lost limbs, and we kept it secret. Kept it exclusive. Let billions suffer and die to maintain economic and social control. The interview continued for another 40 minutes. Kane provided documents, video footage, patient testimonies. She named names, senators, CEOs, foreign leaders who'd been quietly cured while publicly supporting the pharmaceutical status quo. She explained how the technology worked in terms that university physicists would spend years trying to understand. And she revealed why she'd finally come forward. The others, the source of the technology, they're done with the exchange. They have what they needed from us. They're pulling out, taking their pods with them. Unless we act now, unless we reverse engineer what we have, we'll lose this technology forever. The interview ended with a bombshell. I've established a foundation. We're building open source pods, sharing the specifications globally. It will take time, years, perhaps decades, to match the original technology. But we will do it. We have to. Humanity's survival depends on it. Daniel's phone rang. Emma, are you watching this? Her voice shook with emotion. Is this why I got better? Did you know about this? He closed his eyes. Yes. Silence then. Thank you. Emma, no. Whatever you did, however you did it, thank you. And now, help them. Help her. Help everyone. She hung up. Daniel stared at the phone, then at the TV where analysts were already debating, politicians were already denying, and the world was already changing. His encrypted phone buzzed, a text from an unlisted number. Time to come home, Mr. Ross. Your country needs you. Full immunity in exchange for your expertise. Thorn. Daniel laughed. Actually laughed. The old spy master had survived after all, and now wanted him to help democratize the very technology they'd killed to protect. He started packing. Costa Rica had been nice, but history was calling. The secret was out, the genie unleashed, and humanity would either rise to transcendence or tear itself apart trying. Either way, Daniel Ross would be there, building pods, training technicians, trying to give everyone the miracle that had saved Emma. It wouldn't be easy. The old guard would fight. The technology was barely understood. The social upheaval would be massive. But for the first time in 5 years, Daniel felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. The cure for everything existed. And finally it would belong to everyone.